Hey there, story lovers. This is Beyond Hogwarts, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. Horus and Hathor adopted Harry at age 3, and Egyptian gods made him immortal god of sky and love. Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1. The cupboard and the Kai. The hot water pipe that ran along the left wall of the cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive, had not been hot since September. It was now the 3rd of November, and the cold it radiated was specific and intentional, the cold of metal that has given up any pretense of its former function and is now simply a surface for the dark to rest against. The cupboard measured 4 feet by 2.5 at its widest point. There was a hook on the back of the door where a child's coat might hang, if the child were given a coat. There was a shelf above the hook where a spider plant had been placed and forgotten, and the spider plant, with the tenacious indifference of its kind, was thriving. There was a mat on the floor. It had been a welcome mat before it was a bed. It still said welcome in letters that were wearing away at the center from years of foot traffic, the W and the E nearly gone, leaving something that read LCOM in the dark, which meant nothing and was therefore appropriate. On the mat, pressed against the wall that held firm, the other wall had a creak in it, and the child had learned the creak, the way very young children learn the things adults call instinct, and are actually survival. A boy of 3 years and 22 days lay in pajamas that were 4 sizes too large, and had been laundered so many times that what remained of their color was not a color so much as the memory of one. He was awake. He had been awake for a long time, watching the quality of the dark change as his eyes adjusted to it, finding the gradients, the faint gray line where the door met its frame, the slightly darker dark of the shelf above him, the pale parallelogram of the mat's surviving letters. He did not cry. He had already, at 3 years and 22 days, arrived at the end of the particular experiment in which crying is the input and warmth is the expected output. The experiment had run long enough to produce reliable results. The results were, sound produced footsteps on the stairs, and footsteps were not warmth. His name, when the Dursleys used it, was Boy. He had green eyes, very green, in the way of certain deep water that registers as green because it is too deep to be any other color. He had a shock of black hair that grew in every direction simultaneously, as though each strand had been given its own opinion about the world and had chosen to act on it. He had a scar on his forehead in the shape of a lightning bolt, silvery against his pale skin, old enough to be fully healed, old enough that he had no memory of the pain it had come from, which was its own mercy. He lay on the mat and watched the dark and waited, with the specific, ancient patience of a very small person who has no alternative to waiting, for whatever came next. On the other side of the world, where it was afternoon and the kind of hot that has opinions, a falcon turned in a long, lazy arc at an altitude where the air thinned to something vertiginous, and the land below resolved into pure geometry. The brown grid of fields, the wide gold thread of the Nile, the white blaze of temple pylons catching the sun. The falcon's wingspan was considerable. Its left eye was golden, a color that sat somewhere beyond the spectrum of ordinary gold, the color of something that has been looking at everything for long enough to carry everything it has seen in its iris. This eye, the golden eye, the moon eye that had been remade into something that saw more than the moon, looked at Egypt below with the quality of attention that mortals call omniscience, and that is really just the complete absence of selective vision. Nothing was filtered. Nothing was prioritized by preference. The sky opened into the horizon in every direction, and the falcon read it the way a scholar reads a text in a language that preceded all other languages, and the sky yielded its information, as it always did, freely and without condition, because the sky and the falcon had long since arrived at a state of mutual recognition that rendered the question of ownership irrelevant. Horus, Lord of the Sky, avenger of his father, King of the living, he who is above, was tracking a crocodile near the eastern bank south of Luxor. The crocodile had taken a fishing boat. This fell, administratively, in a contested region between his jurisdiction and Sobek's, and the question of where exactly one god's mandate ended and another's began was the kind of question that divine authority had been generating since the world was made and had not, in all that time, arrived at a satisfying resolution. The crocodile turned south, Sobek's problem. In the pause between one wing beat and the next, with no particular intention, the golden eye looked west. It found a thread, not light, not sound, not any frequency on the spectrum that has a name. A thread of Ka, the invisible tether that connects a living person to the living world, the animating principle that makes the difference between a body and a person. And this one was the Ka of a child, barely 3 years of age, and it was fraying. Not breaking, not yet. Fraying in the specific manner of something subjected to sustained damage from a source that had no interest in repairing what it was undoing. Cold, hunger, and the particular violence of being treated as though one did not occupy space in the world, which was a violence that did not show on the body but showed, with exquisite clarity, on the Ka. The falcon stopped moving. The falcon folded its wings. Hathor was sitting on the floor of her inner sanctuary at Dendera, which was the kind of thing that a goddess could do for exactly as long as she chose, and she had been choosing it since the afternoon prayers had finished and the last petitioner had gone, because the sanctuary after petitioners were gone had a quality that music had between notes. The memory of sound, the anticipation of it, the living presence of the pause. She had a sistrum in her lap and was doing nothing with it, which was distinct from doing nothing in general. The sistrum was present because some things need to be held even when they are not being played. Hathor, mistress of joy, lady of the sycamore, golden one, Eye of Ra in the aspect of love and the aspect of fury, and all the aspects between those poles that did not have names but were felt by everyone who had ever been moved by anything. She had been sitting on her own floor in her own silence for perhaps an hour when she heard the wing beats. She knew the tempo. She knew it the way she knew the tempo of the Nile, the tempo of the feast, the tempo of every rhythm in the world that had been present since before the word rhythm existed. She knew it specifically as the tempo of a god moving with intent rather than direction, which was faster than ordinary flight and carried in its sound a quality of compression, of gathered purpose. "Horus," she said. She did not open her eyes. He landed in the doorway in the shape of a man, and even in this shape he carried the sky in him the way a vessel carries water, fully and with evidence of the effort. Broad-shouldered, the white and gold of a king, the double crown that he wore as easily as other people wore their own faces. He was standing in the doorway rather than entering, which meant he had arrived at something and was still deciding how to deliver it. "There is a child," he said. Hathor set the sistrum on the floor beside her, very carefully. The care with which she set it down was the only visible indicator of what his words had done in her, because Hathor was a goddess whose surface was managed with the precision of a master musician managing a performance, and what happened underneath the surface was her own business. "Where?" she said. "Britain." He moved into the sanctuary now fully, the way he moved into difficult situations, without announcement directly. "In a cupboard, Hathor. There is a latch on the outside. He is 3 years old in his Ka." "Stop," she said. He stopped. "How long to get there?" He did not reach for the answer. He had already calculated it, was already calculating it, in the way that a god of sky calculates distance, not through arithmetic but through direct apprehension of the arc between 2 points on the surface of a sphere. 2 minutes, he said, at speed, perhaps less. "Then we are already late," she said, not in anger, not exactly. There is a kind of steadiness that functions the way anger functions, that has the same force, the same absolute quality of directed energy without the heat. This was that. She rose from the floor in a single motion that had nothing of hurry in it and everything of intention, smoothed her dress by habit because the dress was already smooth, and looked at him. "Go," she said. "I'm behind you." He was gone before she finished the sentence. The displacement of air he left was a small thunderclap, the sonic evidence of something that had been in one place and was now in another at a speed the air found presumptuous. Hathor picked up the sistrum from the floor. She held it for a moment, feeling its weight, the weight of it, the specific heft of the instrument she had played since before the word music existed, and then she leaned it carefully against the wall and walked through the doorway of the sanctuary, and continued walking in the way that gods walk when they are not walking but moving through the world's own fabric, the folded cloth trick of a universe that is much smaller when you know where its seams are, and emerged in a street in Surrey that smelled of fox and frost, and the particular chemical cleanliness of a neighborhood that has opinions about the appearance of order. 4:47 in the morning. The street was the gray blue of a winter night that has not yet decided to become a winter morning. Number 4 sat in its row of identical houses with the brass 4 on the door catching the streetlight, and the dry wreath that had been there since late October, and the frosted lawn, and the dark windows. Horus was standing in front of the door with his hands at his sides. He had not touched it. He was very still in the way that he was still before battles. Not the stillness of peace, but the stillness of compressed energy. The stillness of the sky in the specific moment before lightning that is not absence but extreme presence of something about to declare itself. Hathor came to stand beside him. She read the house the way she read every human dwelling. Not its architecture but its feeling, the quality of what had been generated inside it over years, and had accumulated in the walls the way music accumulates in the walls of a room that has held many performances. What she read in number 4, Privet Drive, was a specific species of smallness, not poverty, not hardship, not the smallness of limited circumstance, but the smallness of people who had decided that the world owed them safety from anything that exceeded their existing categories, and had been converting that decision into daily practice for so long that it had calcified into reflex, into cruelty executed without malice, which was its own kind of precision. She put her hand on Horus's arm, not to stop him. He did not need stopping, he was already stopped. Just to be beside him, which was a different thing. Open the door, she said. He did not use magic. He put his palm flat against the wood and pushed, and the door moved inward with the ease of something recognizing authority, and they stepped into the hallway of number 4, which was carpeted in beige and smelled of cooked food and cleaning products deployed in quantities that suggested the real smell of the house was something to be managed. A photograph on the wall. A man, a woman, a child, all large, all blonde, arranged in the posture of people who have asked to be documented in their happiness and have made their faces perform it on request. Hathor looked at the photograph for the length of time it took her to understand what it contained, and then she looked away, because there were things even the mistress of joy found beneath her sustained attention. The cupboard door was under the stairs. It had a simple lever latch. The latch was on the outside. Horus looked at this latch for a moment with the golden eye at its most complete, the look that saw everything the latch was and everything it represented, and the full scope of what its placement on the outside of the door had meant for the child on the other side of it. He lifted the latch. The dark inside the cupboard was thick and particular, the dark of an enclosed space that has been dark for a long time and has no ambition toward anything else. In the dark, the child was awake, and he looked at the door when it opened, and the light from the hallway came in across the floor in a wedge that caught the LCOM letters on the mat and turned them briefly golden before the light shifted to include the 2 figures in the doorway, and the golden wedge was eclipsed by their shadows. He looked at them. He was pressed against the wall that held firm, his knees against his chest, his enormous pajamas pooled around his feet. He had been in the process, before the door opened, of counting the sounds of the house. The way you take inventory of a space you've been given no other way to understand. But now there were new sounds and new shapes in the doorway, and he looked at them with eyes that were not frightened in the way that children are frightened when they startle, but watchful in the way that children are watchful when they have learned that the world's next move is always the most important information available. He looked at Hathor first, then Horus, then back to Hathor, with the particular methodology of a child who has learned to read adults through their faces rather than their words, because faces are harder to manage than words, and because the people who have managed his world so far have managed it through words while their faces told the actual story. Hathor crouched down to his level. The hallway was not built for crouching, and she was not a small woman, but she came down with the ease of a body that has never had occasion to find any posture difficult. And she looked at the child in the cupboard, and the child in the cupboard looked at her, and between them passed the specific quality of mutual recognition that exists between 2 people who are both, in their own registers, ancient in the experience of suffering, and both, in this moment, surprised. She did not reach for him. She did not use a warm voice or the particular register that adults use when they are performing kindness at children. She spoke plainly, the way she spoke to all honest things. "We've been looking for you," she said. The child's chin moved downward and back up. It was not quite a nod. It was the gesture of someone receiving information and making room for it, deciding where it would live. Horus crouched beside Hathor. He did this with considerably less ease, the architecture of the hallway and the architecture of his frame being in fundamental disagreement. And he looked at the mat and the pipe and the spider plant and the latch on the outside of the door, and the golden eye took inventory of all of it without visible reaction, which was its own reaction. Then he looked at the child. "Can you stand?" he said. The child stood. He stood with the deliberate, careful movement of someone who has had extensive practice standing on his own, and he wobbled once when the mat shifted under his feet, and he found his balance and he waited. He was standing in his enormous pajamas in the doorway of his cupboard in the pale light from the hallway, and he was 3 years and 22 days old, and he was waiting to see what this was. Horus extended his hand, palm up open, offered at the level of the child's own hands, not reaching down from above, not the hand of command or capture. The hand offered the way you offer something to a bird that is not yet certain of you. Still, patient, the body's whole argument resting in the gesture without urgency. The child looked at the hand. Green eyes to open palm, 3 full seconds of the weighing that is not thought but something beneath thought, older than thought. The body's own calibration of risk and worth and the history of every previous offered hand and what those hands had done. Then he put his own hand in it. His hand was very small. His fingers were cold in the specific way of someone who has been cold for long enough that the cold is no longer a complaint but simply a condition, the neutral fact of his temperature. Horus felt each separate finger's chill. He closed his hand around the child's, gently and completely, the way you close a fist around something valuable, and the warmth came immediately, not gradual, not building but sudden and absolute, the way light changes when a cloud moves off the sun. The child made a sound. It lived below words, that sound. It was not a word and not a cry and not quite a sigh, but it was one of the most specific sounds Horus had ever heard, carrying in it several years of held breath released in one compressed exhalation, the sound of a very small person encountering a warmth they had stopped expecting and finding that their body remembered wanting it. His fingers tightened around Horus's. Hathor put her arm around his thin shoulders, and he stood between them in the hallway, and above them, the Dursley family grinned its documented happiness from the wall, and outside the fox moved through the frost with its amber indifference to everything that was not its own business, and Horus and Hathor walked their son out of number 4, Privet Drive, and left the door open behind them. Hathor carried him out of England and west above the Grey Channel and then south, and the temperature changed in increments that the child tracked with his face. The cold releasing first from his hands where Hathor held him, then from his face as the air thickened with warmth it hadn't remembered to put away for the night. And then the smell came, the salt of the Mediterranean, and then below that the first traces of something else, something wet and ancient and green. The smell of a river that had been dreaming since before the word dream. He had his arms around Hathor's neck. He had put them there himself, quietly, sometime over the sea, and she had said nothing about it. Above them, the falcons circled, wide, patient arcs, the altitude of someone who is watching over rather than rushing forward, the altitude of a father accompanying at a distance that says I am here without the demand of proximity. They came down to the river's edge with the first thinning of full dark, that hour before dawn when the sky admits it is considering changing. The stone was warm from the previous day's heat, warmth stored in it the way walls store music. The river moved south with enormous, indifferent intention, ferrying the moonlight that was left. Hathor set the child down on the stone and crouched beside him, and he looked at the water. He had never seen a river. He had seen the street outside number 4 through the gap under the cupboard door when the door was occasionally ajar. He had seen the ceiling of the cupboard, and the walls of the cupboard, and the back of the door with the hook on it, and the welcome mat with the worn letters. He had not seen a river. The Nile at this hour was not gold but pewter blue, the color of something that has not yet decided what it will be when the light arrives. It moved with a sound that was continuous and various, the way breath is continuous and various, always present, never exactly the same. He stood at the edge and watched it for a time with his arms loose at his sides and his face tilted toward it. "Where is this?" he said. Egypt, Hathor said. He turned the word over in his mouth, exploring its shape. Egypt. A word that sounded like something important. He looked at the river again, and the river looked back with its long, uncurated gaze. Horus landed on a rock in his man form, crown set aside. Harry would not see the double crown for another several months, not until he had grown accustomed to Horus in his daily form, which was the practical form, the working form. And the three of them sat on the warm stone beside the river in the dark between night and morning, and the river moved between its banks the way it had always moved, carrying everything given to it without judgment. "Are you going to put me in a cupboard?" the child said. He said it with no particular inflection. He was not asking it in fear. He was asking it in the same register in which he had been taking inventory of the cupboard's sounds, seeking information, establishing the parameters of the new space, because a very small person's first task in any new space is to determine its rules before the rules are demonstrated through consequences. Horus made a sound that began low in his chest and did not become a word. Hathor pressed her hand flat against the child's back, between his shoulder blades, the warm weight of a hand that is not holding but simply present. "No," she said. "There are no cupboards here." The child turned around and looked at her. He looked at her face the way he had looked at her face in the hallway, the full green-eyed inventory of whether the words in the face were running the same story. Hathor held still under the examination and let him look, because she had never in 14,000 years been afraid of being looked at, and because this kind of looking was the most honest form of due diligence available to a child who had no other instrument. He looked for a long time. She did not look away, and she did not modify her expression, and she did not produce the particular performance of reassurance that adults offer when they want a child to stop asking. The child turned back to the river. "Okay," he said. They named him in the morning, which arrived in the way Egyptian mornings arrived, without gradation, without the English sky's long gray negotiation between night and day. The sun came up over the eastern desert, and the desert went from dark to gold in a matter of minutes. And the gold of it was not a warm color exactly, but a forceful one, a color with mass, a color that hit the stone and the water and the palm fronds and the white of the temple pylons and said, "Here now this," with the certainty of something that has been making this announcement every morning since the first morning, and has no doubt about its right to keep making it. Hathor had bathed him in the river water while the sky was still changing, not ceremonially, not with language or rite, just practically, cupping water in her hands and washing the cold and the gray of England from him while he stood in the shallows with the expression of someone discovering that water at this temperature was a different experience than the cold of the pipe in the cupboard. He stood still and let himself be washed and looked at the river moving around his feet with the focused attention he gave to all new sensory data. Now he sat on the warm stone of the outer courtyard wall with his feet dangling over the edge, wearing clean linen the color of undyed wool, and there was a dish of dates in front of him. He had eaten 4 of them before Hathor had fully set the dish down, which she had noted without remarking on. Horus sat on the opposite wall with his back against the stone, watching his son with the total, unguarded attention that was his particular register of care. He did not watch from a posture of surveillance or management. He watched the way he watched the sky, with complete interest and no agenda. "We should give him a name," Horus said. Hathor, who was refilling the date dish from a bowl she had brought from inside, said, without looking up, "He has a name, Harry." "It is a diminutive." Horus was not dismissive when he said this. He was precise. A familiar form of a longer name, chosen by people who did not choose it with care. It carries nothing. "Harry," said the child, with the emphasis of someone noting a misunderstanding that should be corrected before it becomes a pattern. Horus looked at him. The golden eye, that terrible and complete instrument of perception, regarded the child without the particular adult discomfort that most creatures felt under direct attention from the Lord of the Sky. He regarded him as he regarded everything that mattered, as a thing worth the full weight of seeing. "We will not take it," he said. "It is yours. Names given to you belong to you, even when those who gave them gave nothing else." A pause, the pause of someone selecting words from a register that does not habitually accommodate gentleness and is learning to. But a name is also an address for who you are, The one you have tells people where you have been. I am suggesting another for where you are going. The child absorbed this. He ate a fifth date. His green eyes moved to Horus and held there while he processed, and Horus sat with the look without flinching from it, which was its own statement. What would it be? The child said. Horus leaned forward, elbows on his knees, bringing himself lower and closer in the posture of a king who has decided that this is a conversation, not a decree. Haruemakit, he said, giving each syllable its full weight, the sounds full and deliberate in the morning air. Horus on the horizon, the place where the sky meets the earth, the place where the sun is always arriving. The child repeated it very quietly under his breath, moving the sounds in his mouth, feeling their shape, the way he had felt the shape of Egypt an hour ago, feeling whether it held, whether it was a word that would bear weight. Harry, he said, and that one. Both, Hathor said, at once. Yes. Harry Haruemakit, very seriously. The full name. Then he looked at Horus, and in the looking was the quality of a question that was also a thing he had already decided and was presenting for acknowledgement rather than permission. What do I call you? He said. Horus looked at Hathor. Hathor looked at Horus. Between them passed 14,000 years of a marriage that had survived everything the world could produce to test it. And in this specific moment between them passed also the very precise amusement of a woman who had known this moment was coming and had chosen not to warn her husband, because some things are better received without preparation. Horus looked back at the child on the wall. I am Horus, he said, Lord of the Sky, King of the two lands, Avenger of my father, he who is above. He listed these not with pride but with the tone of someone providing reference data. Then you may call me father if you choose. The choice is entirely yours. Not a requirement, Hathor murmured, at precisely the correct volume. The child looked at Horus. He looked at him in the way he had looked at the offered hand in the dark hallway, that ancient, measuring, 3-second weighing of risk and worth, the full operation of the most sophisticated instrument a person has, which is the body's own judgment under pressure. Then he turned his eyes to Hathor and gave her the same examination, the same full inventory, the same unhurried honesty. Mother, he said to Hathor, one word, no qualifiers, final. Hathor's hand stopped moving over the date dish. Father, he said to Horus. The Lord of the Sky and King of the two lands sat on the wall across from his son and looked at him for a moment that held its own quality of weight. Then he reached across the space between them and set one hand on top of the child's black, many-directioned hair, not ruffling it, not adjusting it, just the weight of the hand, warm and specific. The hand of a god who had held weapons and the petitions of kings and the evidence of the world's suffering, and was now holding the head of a boy of 3 who had decided, with more courage than most adults could assemble, to extend the word father in the direction of something vast and uncertain and necessary. The child held very still, not braced, not tensed, held, the way you hold when something is happening that you do not want to disturb before it finishes. Harry Haruemakit, Horus said, and his voice was the voice he used only when he was not performing anything, the voice that existed beneath the iron-hard cadences of the king and the warrior, the voice that was simply him, old and honest and present. Sun. Above them the morning was fully committed to itself now, the sun clear of the desert cliffs, and doing its declarative work on the courtyard stone, and the river ran gold below the wall, and the dates sat in their dish, and the spider plant would have been very comfortable here. The first year was the year of counting sounds. Every night, several times each night, the child woke with the full-body alertness of someone who had trained himself to sleep lightly because sleep in the cupboard was not safe from interruption, and he would lie in the dark of his room, with a door that had a handle on the inside as well as the outside, a door that he could open whenever he chose, a fact that he had tested 18 times in the first week, and which continued, without exception, to remain true, and he would count the sounds. No water pipe cold and silent in the wall, no footsteps above, no sound of the stairs under someone's descending weight, no latch. What there was, the river, the particular sound of a large body of water conducting its business in the dark, continuous and purposeful and completely indifferent. The night birds, Egyptian night birds, whose calls were nothing like the sounds of Surrey in the dark, which he catalogued and filed as not a threat but unfamiliar, a category that shrank as the weeks passed. The quality of the warm night air coming through the window, which had no glass, only a wooden screen that let the air through and patterned the moonlight on the floor. And some nights Hathor. She did not announce herself. She appeared in the doorway when the sounds had not been enough, when the counting had run its course and sleep had not followed, and she would sit with her back against the wall of his room in the dark, and she would hum. Not music in any organized sense, no melody, no progression. A tone, low and warm, a sound that seemed to originate below sound, that existed at the frequency of presence itself rather than the frequency of any particular note. He would lie in his bed and listen, and the tone would walk him down through the layers of wakefulness toward sleep, and in the morning neither of them mentioned it, because this was a form of dignity that Hathor extended to him instinctively, the dignity of not requiring him to name what he needed in order to receive it. He learned to swim in the second month. Horus supervised this with the focused, undemonstrative attention he brought to all practical instruction. He stood on the bank while the child waded into the shallows of a tributary pool calm enough for learning, and he did not call encouragement, and he did not warn constantly of dangers, and he did not perform the particular anxious choreography of adults who are afraid of children's contact with the physical world. He stood on the bank and watched his son walk into the water. The water was warm. The child stood in it up to his knees and felt the current move around his legs, testing him, and he tested it back. He waded deeper, hip deep on his small frame, and the current pushed, and he pushed back, planting his feet on the riverbed with the same proprioceptive attention he had given to the wall that held firm. By the end of the first week, he was swimming, rough and determined, with more enthusiasm than technique, the swimming of someone who has discovered that their body is genuinely good at something and is conducting a sustained and delighted investigation of the extent of this fact. He swam until his arms wore out, pulled himself onto the bank, sat in the sun for 20 minutes to reconstitute, and went back in. Horus, sitting on the bank, allowed the crease between his eyes to release. Egyptian came into him the way it came, first slowly, accumulating, then filling. Hathor spoke to him in both languages simultaneously, weaving between them in the middle of sentences, and his mind sorted it the way his body had sorted the river's current, by finding the rules inside the experience rather than learning the rules before attempting the experience. He was dreaming in Egyptian by the third month, and he came to tell Hathor about this one morning over figs, reporting it with the careful seriousness of someone conveying information that seemed relevant. "Yes," she said, and handed him another fig. By the end of the first year, he knew what Horus was and what Hathor was, not through explanation but through inhabitation, the same way he knew what the river was, by being near it, by watching what it did, by gradually understanding that the quality of its presence was not a performance but a nature. The prayers that the priests brought, the offerings, the way the temple filled with music on feast days and with grief on ordinary days, and with the particular quality of both simultaneously, that was the signature of Hathor's domain. He watched all of this from the doorways and the courtyard walls with his green eyes taking careful inventory, learning the texture of the divine the way he had learned the texture of the cupboard, through accumulated, attentive presence. And he understood, in the wordless register, where the most important understandings are made, that what he was watching was not separate from him, that the divine was not a category he observed from outside, that something in him not borrowed, not installed, but his, something that had been reaching for expression since before he had language for reaching, was in conversation with what he was watching, in the way the river was in conversation with the sky. He was 7 when he asked about the scar. He had known it was there his whole life. The mirror in Hathor's rooms was not shy. But 7 is when narrative becomes available, when the relationship between cause and effect becomes a story rather than a sequence, when the question of why acquires the depth it requires to be worth asking. He stood in front of the mirror in the early morning and put his finger on the lightning bolt and felt its coolness under his fingertip, cooler than the surrounding skin, the way scar tissue always runs slightly outside the body's standard temperature, as though it is not quite convinced it belongs to the same system. He went to find Horus. Horus was making his morning circuit of the outer walls, the slow inspection of a king who has been making this same inspection since before the concept of inspection existed. He turned when he heard Harry's footsteps fully, as he always turned. The complete gesture of someone who gives their whole attention or gives nothing, with no intermediate state. Harry stopped in front of his father and pointed at his own forehead. "Where did this come from?" he said. Horus looked at the scar. He looked at it with the golden eye, seeing not just the silver mark on the skin, but the history it pointed toward, the full record of what had made it. Then he looked at Harry's face, the 7-year-old face with its patient green eyes and its quality of willingness to receive difficult information without requiring it to be delivered gently. Because Harry had always been, in Horus's experience, a person who preferred truth at its actual size, rather than truth reduced to a size considered manageable. Horus walked to the wall and sat on it and indicated the stone beside him, and Harry sat. And Horus told him. He told him about Godric's Hollow and a house with lights in the windows, and a man named James who had stood between his family and something that would not be stopped by standing, and had stood there anyway. He told him about a woman named Lily who had done something that was not a spell or a charm or any technique from any grimoire in any library in any world, who had made, from love, a wall, not metaphorically, not symbolically. A wall of absolute love, the only material in existence that killing could not understand because it was built from the opposite principle. And when the killing came and hit the wall, it had broken on it the way the calm scene breaks on the cliff face of the valley, becoming something else entirely. He told him that the curse had returned along the path of its own making and struck the one who cast it, and that this was not luck and not accident, and not the exception to a rule but the rule itself. The fundamental physics of a universe in which love as force is not softness, but the hardest thing there is. He told him that Lily Potter had died making the wall, that she had made it anyway, with full knowledge of the cost, which was the definition of absolute love and the most Hathor-natured thing that had ever occurred in the long, complicated magical history of a small island in the North Atlantic. Harry sat on the warm wall in the Egyptian morning and received all of this with his hands flat on his knees and his eyes on the river, and the river moved past with its eternal, unhurried insistence, and the morning got brighter around them, and a kite bird turned above the far bank in a long, lazy arc that caught the sun on its wings. After a long time, Harry said, "She loved me that much." "Yes," Horus said, and then she was gone, not grieving, establishing. Setting the fact in its correct position in the sequence. "Yes," Harry looked at the river. He turned the scar finger over in his lap and looked at his own hand. "And then the Dursleys," he said. "Yes." A pause, and in the pause was the quality of something Horus did not often carry visible on his surface, a weight that was not regret exactly but was in the vicinity of it, the weight of a god who arrived 2 minutes late. "I came when I saw your Cothred. I came immediately." Harry looked at his father. He looked at him, the jaw, the golden eye, the hands that had held his own small cold hand in the dark hallway, the hands that had set themselves on top of his head in the courtyard that first morning with the wordless weight of a claim. He looked at all of this with his green eyes at their full depth. "I know," he said. "And then, I'm not angry at her." He meant Lily. He meant both of them, James who stood in the way and Lily who made the wall, the two people who had spent everything they had on him before he was old enough to understand what spending was. "The scar is proof," he said. "She loved me so much it broke the killing. That's," he paused, searching for a word that was adequate to the thing. "That's not a thing to be angry at. That's the thing she left me. That's my inheritance." Horus looked at his son for a long time. The golden eye was very still, very full, doing the thing it did when it had received something it would carry for a long time. He said nothing. He did not need to say anything. The quality of his attention said what needed saying. Harry looked at the scar one more time, his finger finding the shape of the lightning bolt, tracing its 3-stroke path from hairline to brow. Then he put his hand down and jumped off the wall. "I'm going to swim before it gets hot," he said. "Go," Horus said. And Harry went, across the courtyard and through the gate and down to the river, and the sound of his feet on the warm stone was the ordinary, irreplaceable sound of a child who knows where he lives and where he is going and what is behind him. And Horus sat on the wall after he disappeared through the gate and looked at the river for a long while, alone in the morning gold, doing nothing in particular, being, for the first time in a very long time, grateful in the way that gods are grateful when they allow themselves to be, completely and without ceremony, and with the specific quality of someone who knows what the alternative was. And the spider plant, transplanted from its shelf in the cupboard under the stairs to a stone pot in the courtyard of Hathor's temple at Dendera, where it received the sun and the river air, and the indifferent company of two very old gods and one boy who had recently acquired a name, grew in its new location with the same tenacious, joyful indifference to adversity that had seen it through the dark. It put out 3 new shoots by spring. Chapter 2. The education of the horizon. The sky sense arrived in pieces, which was the sky's way of introducing itself to someone who had not yet developed the capacity to receive it all at once. The first piece arrived when Harry was 5. Sitting on the roof of the temple before dawn in the posture he had developed for this specific ritual, cross-legged, facing east, hands on his knees, the river below and the desert cliffs beyond, and the sky above arranged around him like a room he was gradually learning to inhabit. He came to the roof every morning at this hour because the transition from dark to light was the most honest thing he had found in Egypt, which was a country that contained a great many honest things. It did not manage the transition. It did not ease you into it. The sun came up over the eastern cliffs, and the world went from one thing to another, and the going was total and irreversible, and Harry found this deeply satisfying in a way he could not yet articulate. He was watching the eastern sky thin from black to a deep, specific blue when the feeling arrived. Not in his eyes, not on his skin, somewhere interior, not his chest exactly but the space behind his sternum, a space he had not previously been aware of as a distinct location in his body. A tightening. Faint, metallic, the sensation of something charged and distant and enormous moving in a direction he could determine without looking, the way you can determine the direction of sound in the dark without turning your head. He turned his head anyway, east-southeast, his face toward the desert, a storm, 600 miles, maybe 7, moving northwest. He felt it the way he felt the river when he swam, not with a single sense but with the whole surface of his attention, as something that had mass and temperature and intention, a weather system with its own logic moving through the world, with the authority of something that does not require permission. He sat with the feeling for the full duration of the sunrise, learning its texture, and then he went downstairs and found Horus in the room where he read in the mornings, surrounded by the accumulated correspondence of a god who has been receiving the prayers and petitions of a people for several thousand years, and has developed a filing system of considerable sophistication. "There is a storm," Harry said, "east-southeast, 600 miles, maybe more, moving northwest." Horus set down the papyrus he was holding. The golden eye opened to its full aperture and regarded the 5-year-old standing in the doorway in his morning linen, hair unmanaged, feet bare on the stone floor, with the quality of attention that the Lord of the Sky devoted to things that required the Lord of the Sky's full consideration. 490 miles, Horus said. "You'll develop accuracy for distance over time. The directional sense is already clean." Harry came into the room and sat on the floor in his cross-legged position, looking up at his father. "Is it yours?" he said. "Is it something of yours that's in me because I'm yours and that's why it works?" Horus set the papyrus fully aside and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, coming down to the register of a conversation rather than a pronouncement. "The sky recognizes you because you are mine," he said, choosing each word with the care of someone who knows that what he says now will be load-bearing. "That is true. But a dog recognizes another dog's scent. That does not mean the scent is borrowed. Something in you was always going to reach for the sky, Harry. I gave it a direction. The reaching is yours." Harry looked at his hands. He turned them palm up on his knees as though checking whether they were the same hands they had been this morning before the feeling arrived. They were. They were also in some way he could not describe changed. "It's mine," he said. "Entirely," Horus said. Hathor appeared in the doorway holding a piece of bread, which she set on the floor in front of Harry with the quiet efficiency of someone who has been feeding people for 14,000 years and has learned that most important conversations are improved by the presence of bread. "The sky will be there tomorrow," she said. "Eat something." Harry ate the bread. He ate it slowly, still feeling the distant storm in the space behind his sternum, 490 miles, moving northwest, its particular metallic signature growing neither stronger nor weaker in the time it took him to eat, steady as a note held by a musician who knows the piece. The storm arrived 2 days later and moved across the eastern desert with the authority of something that had been building itself in empty places for a long time and had finally arrived somewhere worth the effort. Harry stood on the roof in the rain, the desert rain, brief and total and smelling of dust being converted into something alive, with his arms loose at his sides and his face up and his eyes open, feeling the full system of it move over and through him, learning its vocabulary, adding it to the growing lexicon of the sky. By 8 he could read the Mediterranean's mood the way Hathor read a room, not by looking at it but by receiving it, passively and constantly, the way you receive sound. The calm scene gave him 3 days' warning now, and the storms of the early inundation season gave him a week. He had learned to distinguish between whether that was doing what weather does and whether that was doing something else, whether that had been pushed or bent or generated by a will external to the system's own logic. And this distinction was important in the world he inhabited, where the natural and the supernatural ran alongside each other like two threads in the same cloth, and the weave was what mattered rather than the separation. Horus began formal training when Harry was 9.5, not at a designated hour, not with a curriculum announced in advance. It began the way all the things Horus taught began, with a demonstration. He rose from the courtyard in the form of the falcon, full wingspan, the wingspan of a god, which was the wingspan of a sky that contained everything, and circled the temple at 20 feet, and the quality of his flight was the quality of something that belongs to what it moves through, air not resisted but inhabited, the bird not fighting the medium but being made of it. He circled once and landed on the wall beside Harry and looked at him. Harry looked at the wall's edge. He looked at the sky beyond it. He looked at his father. He stepped off the wall. He went up 12 feet on pure conviction, and then conviction ran up against the body's instinctive understanding of what was supposed to happen when you stepped off a wall. And the body had opinions, and the opinions were loud. And he came sideways and down, and hit the courtyard floor harder than intended, landing on his feet but barely, the impact jarring up through his ankles in a way that communicated a clear message about the relationship between intent and execution. He stood with his feet wide, looking at the middle distance. Then he looked up. Again, Horus said. The second time he stayed up for 30 seconds before the body's argument became definitive. The third time he reached 20 feet and held it, wobbling at the top, the air holding him with the slightly reluctant quality of something being asked to do something it will do but would like acknowledged as an effort. The fourth time he moved forward. By the time the sun hit the western cliffs and the courtyard filled with late orange light, Harry was flying at 40 feet with something approaching the quality of a person who belongs in the air rather than a person negotiating with it. Not Horus's fluency. That was 10,000 years of practice and an ontological relationship with the sky that was not available to someone who had been alive for 9.5 years. But the beginning of fluency, the first words of a language that would, in time, become native. He came down to the roof with sand on his face, and his hair more directionally diverse than usual and sat cross-legged, while Hathor brought water and a bowl of chickpeas, and said nothing about the landing she had witnessed from the inner courtyard, which had been, from her perspective, more instructive about Harry's relationship with stubbornness than about his relationship with the sky. Harry drank the water, he looked at his hands, then he looked at Horus. "Why didn't it work the first time?" he said. "Because you were asking the sky to hold you," Horus said. "You cannot ask the sky. The sky does not hold things, it receives things that belong in it." He looked at his son. "You don't ask the river to support you when you swim. You enter the river and you move, and the river supports you because you have become part of its system. The sky is the same." Harry turned this over. He ate 3 chickpeas. "I have to become part of it." "You already are part of it," Horus said. "You need to stop forgetting." This was, Harry understood, not encouragement. It was technical information. He filed it in the part of himself where technical information about the sky lived, which was becoming a substantial archive. The grace came at 12, which was also the year the Kepesh argument began. By 12, he flew at night over the desert with the ease of something that had always been airborne, high enough that the stars were close and the world below was a map of itself. The Nile, a ribbon of reflected light threading south through dark land. He flew alone on most nights, and the aloneness was not loneliness, but its opposite, the particular fullness of a person in complete possession of their own nature, moving through the element that answered them without the social complexity of being witnessed. He would come in before dawn, dropping from altitude to temple height in a controlled dive that ended in the courtyard with a precision that had taken 3 years to develop, and which he was now beginning to find insufficient, which meant it was becoming automatic, which meant it was time for something harder. He always knew when his father was awake and had been watching from the north roof, not because Horus said anything, but because the quality of the morning's first exchange, the brief nod, the cup of water set on the courtyard wall, carried in it the specific density of someone who had been paying attention for several hours. The Kepesh argument began on a Tuesday in the month of Thoth when Harry was 12 years and 4 months, and it began, as many arguments between them began, in the middle of what appeared to be a different conversation. They were in the outer courtyard, and Harry was describing the flight path of a migration of storks he had tracked across the eastern Mediterranean for 4 days, which was interesting because the storks were using a thermal pattern he had not seen before, a pattern that suggested the upper atmosphere had shifted slightly north of its usual autumn position, which had implications for the coming inundation season. He was in the middle of this description when Horus said, "You need to learn the Kepesh." Harry finished his sentence about the thermal pattern, then he looked at his father. "I can fly at altitude where the air is thin. I can feel every weather system within 600 miles. I can redirect a calm scene. Why do I need a sword?" "Because," Horus said, in the particular cadence that was iron-hard and entirely reasonable, and which Harry had learned to recognize as the cadence of a position that would not move regardless of the quality of the argument deployed against it. "Not every conflict happens at altitude. And not every enemy can be moved by weather. That is a circular argument. It is a statement derived from experience which is not circular but historical. I'm 12. Alexander." Alexander was Greek and had a complicated relationship with his father, and I don't think that comparison serves either of us. Horus looked at his son across the courtyard. The crease between his eyes was present but not pronounced, which meant he was amused and not intending to show it, which Harry had learned to read in the first few years of paying careful attention to a face that was comprehensively disciplined. "Pick up the training staff," Horus said. "The argument can continue while you work." Harry picked up the training staff. He held it the way he held everything new, with the attention of someone who is not yet performing competence but building it, and who understands the difference. The argument, as it turned out, did not continue while he worked, because the work required too much concentration to run concurrently with a debate about its own necessity, which Horus had known and Harry came to understand 40 minutes in, at the point where his arms were sending urgent communications about their current relationship with the wooden staff, and his attention had narrowed to the single problem in front of him. He came back to the argument a week later when he had begun to feel the staff's logic in his hands and could think about something other than the mechanics. By then, without fully tracking how it had happened, the argument had become moot. He could feel what the Kepesh was for. He had always been able to feel what things were for. The formal learning of Hathor's gift was not a curriculum. It was a series of encounters that Hathor did not arrange but observed, and intervened in only when Harry had made an error significant enough to require correction before it became habit. He had been using the gift instinctively since he was 6, since Amenhotep and the lost goat, and the hum that had moved the quality of another person's grief without his conscious direction. He had used it since then with the developing awareness of something that was becoming, year by year, more known to him, the way the sky sense had become more known, through practice and attention and the slow accumulation of mistakes understood. At 8 he had gone all the way in with the woman who was grieving her son, and Hathor had found him on the courtyard stones 2 days later with his hands flat on his thighs and his face turned off, and she had told him about the rope. He had received this correction and filed it in the load-bearing place where Hathor's corrections lived. He practiced the rope after that, not literally, but the principle of it. The maintenance of the thread back to himself while he entered another person's interior weather. The insistence on remaining his own person while receiving someone else's full weight. At 10, he went too far in the other direction and held himself so carefully apart from a young man who had come to the temple with the specific, total despair of someone who has decided the world is finished with them that the young man left without having been reached, which was worse than having been overwhelmed. Harry came to Hathor afterward and sat on the floor of the sanctuary and told her exactly what had happened, with the precise, unsparing honesty he brought to his own failures, which was one of the qualities Hathor found most distinctly his, not his father's quality, not hers, but something the 3 years in the cupboard had built into his character alongside everything else it had built. The inability to be dishonest with himself about what he had done and what it had cost. "You protected yourself instead of him," Hathor said. "Yes," Harry said, and which was more frightening, the thought of going too far in or the thought of not going far enough? Harry sat with this question for a long time. He sat with it the way he sat with flight problems, the way he sat with storm patterns fully, without rushing toward an answer, letting the question be the size it was. "Going too far in," he said eventually, "because if I go too far in I lose myself. If I don't go far enough I only lose him. And which loss is larger?" Hathor said. He looked at her. He understood what she was asking. He understood that she was not asking him to sacrifice himself. She had been very clear, in the years of his education in this particular skill, that martyrdom was not love but its failure, that the person who burned themselves to nothing helping others was not generating warmth but consuming it. She was asking something different. She was asking him to weigh, honestly, the specific calculation he had made in the room with the young man, and to see it for what it was. "I don't know yet," he said. "I don't know how to get the balance right." "No," Hathor said, "you don't." "You will," she paused. "The young man's name is Sennefer. He comes to the evening prayers. Speak to him." Harry spoke to Sennefer that evening, and he did not hum and he did not perform anything, and he went far enough in without losing the rope, and it was not clean and it was not elegant, and at the end of it he was tired in a way that lived behind his eyes and at the base of his skull, and Sennefer sat in the courtyard watching the river with a quality of presence in his face that had not been there in the morning, a quality that was not happiness but was the precursor to it. The decision to still be here tomorrow to find out. Harry came back to Hathor and said, "It's heavy." "Yes," she said, "every time, no, it becomes familiar." Familiar is not light, but it is manageable in a way that unfamiliar is not. He sat with this. "Is that why you have the feasts?" he said. "Because the weight needs somewhere to go." Hathor looked at him with the full devastation of her clarity, the look that said, "You have arrived somewhere real." "The feasts," she said, "are where I give it back. What comes in as grief goes out as music." "You need an outflow, everyone does." She paused. "What is yours?" He thought about the roof at dawn. He thought about the night flights over the desert at altitude, the sky open in every direction, the stars thick above, and the world below organized into the clean geometry of distance. He thought about the specific quality of the air at 3,000 feet, the way it moved through him rather than past him, the way it recognized him. "Flying," he said. "Then fly," she said. "As much as you need to, it is not escape, it is the outflow." He went to the roof after that conversation and was in the air before the sentence had finished landing, climbing through the warm dark of an Egyptian night until the temple was small below him and the river was a thread of moonlight and the sky was what it was at this altitude. Not the sky you saw from below, but the sky you were inside. The sky with no below to it, just depth in every direction. The sky as the medium in which everything moved rather than the ceiling above it. He breathed out. The sword came at 10 in an afternoon of argument, and by 14 Harry was fluent in it. Fluency with the Kepesh was not the fluency of performance or display. It was the fluency of someone who had internalized the weapon's logic so completely that its grammar was continuous with the grammar of his own body, the way swimming had become continuous with the grammar of his body, the way the sky sense was continuous. He did not think about the Kepesh when he used it. He thought about the problem, and the Kepesh was one of the languages available for addressing it, neither privileged nor ignored. Horus sparred with him at full capacity from when Harry was 13 and a half. This had been a decision, on Horus's part, that he had made without announcement. One afternoon, the intensity simply changed, escalated to the level at which the Lord of the Sky and Avenger of his father actually trained, and Harry had felt the change immediately and adjusted to it, not by matching it, but by finding the correct response to it, which was different. The correct response to sparring against a god of war at full capacity was not to try to be stronger or faster, because you were not stronger or faster, and pretending otherwise was a path to injury. The correct response was to be more interesting, to present the god of war with problems the god of war's considerable experience had not catalogued, to find the spaces between established patterns and operate in those spaces with enough conviction that the spaces became territory rather than gaps. Harry was very good at finding spaces. The afternoon Harry caught his father in the ribs, the flat of the staff's tip, clean through the third step of the Nubian combination, the predictable third step he had identified as a tell rather than a trap, because Horus knew that Harry knew the pattern, and therefore the pattern's predictability was itself suspicious. Horus sat on the courtyard floor with a hand on his ribs and did not say anything for a long time. Harry stood across the courtyard, breathing, the staff at his side, waiting. "You modified the combination," Horus said. "The third step is a tell," Harry said, "because you know that I know the pattern. So you using it means either you've forgotten I know it, which you haven't, or you're inviting me to respond to it, which means responding to it directly is wrong." He paused. "So I went left of the expected response and came under." Horus turned the staff over in his hands. The motion was slow and deliberate, the motion of thinking made physical. "Who taught you to do that?" he said. "You did," Harry said, "when you said some enemies need you to speak the language they're expecting while speaking a different one underneath it." Horus was quiet. The golden eye was doing its full work, and what it saw in the 14-year-old across the courtyard, brown and lean, and standing with the kepesh at the correct angle even now, even tired, the angle that had taken a year of drilling to make automatic, was not the accumulation of technique. It was the synthesis, the point at which the individual skills had stopped being individual skills and had become a single integrated way of being in the world, the same synthesis that had happened with the sky sense, the same that was happening with Hathor's gift. The point at which a person stops using their power and starts being it. "You are going to be very difficult to fight," Horus said. "Yes," Harry said. Flatly, factually, the way you confirm something that is simply true. Horus stood from the courtyard floor and brushed dust from his training whites. He looked at his son for another moment, the look that saw past every surface into the full depth of the thing. Then he turned and went inside without another word, which was Horus's highest register of acknowledgement, the acknowledgement that had moved past language because language was insufficient, the acknowledgement that simply incorporated what it had witnessed and continued. Harry set the staff against the wall and sat on the ground and let his body have the tiredness it had been setting aside for the past 2 hours. The afternoon sun came across the courtyard in a long angle, and the stone was warm under him, and a hoopoe bird walked along the opposite wall with the self-important gait of its kind, unconcerned. He was 14 years old and could redirect a sandstorm and feel grief in a room before he entered it, and put the flat of a staff between the ribs of a god of war. He was aware, a boy who had been 3 years old in a cupboard in England not very long ago in the scale of things, and both of these were true simultaneously, and the space between them was not contradiction but architecture, the specific structure of a person built from everything that had happened to them, the difficult things and the beautiful ones, the cold and the warmth, the fraying thread and the hand extended in the dark. He sat in the warm afternoon and held the weight of both. The feasts of Hathor had been part of his life since the first year, but at 12, he began to participate in them rather than observe from the margins. And at 14, his participation had developed into something that the priests and musicians were beginning to deliberately accommodate in their arrangements, though none of them had language for what Harry did in the feast space or why it changed the quality of the gathering. What Harry did was this: he put down a floor. He had arrived at this term himself, at age 12, sitting beside his mother in the inner courtyard as a feast of Hathor filled the temple with the combined sound and movement and feeling of several hundred people simultaneously joyful. And the joy had a quality of instability to it. The instability of something that has no foundation, that is happening in a container too small for it, that might break in any direction. He had felt this without being able to name it and had begun, without planning it, without consciously directing the gift, to generate a low tone beneath the feast's frequency, a ground note, the bass note under the chord, and the feast had organized itself around the note the way a river organizes itself around a large stone in its bed, finding its flow relative to the fixed point, moving faster and more clearly because of it rather than despite it. The feast that afternoon had been, by the consensus of everyone who was old enough to have attended many such feasts and had developed a comparative framework, extraordinary. The priests had assumed this was Hathor. Hathor had sat beside her son in the inner courtyard and allowed this assumption to stand, because there were lessons that were better learned through the student discovering them than through the teacher delivering them. And the lesson Harry needed to learn was that what he had done was his, and was real and was distinct from anything she did. And he would learn this lesson more completely by finding its edges through practice than by being told where they were. He found the edges over 2 years of feasts and understood them by 14. He could hold the floor at a gathering of several hundred for the duration of a feast without the cost exceeding the outflow he had in the nightly flights. He could hold it with enough precision to distinguish between the feast's natural frequency and the emotional weather of individuals within it. Could feel, from across a crowded courtyard, the specific quality of someone's grief or fear or joy, the way you could feel the specific temperature of one stream entering a larger river, the two waters not yet mixed. At 14, he told Hathor about this last development. He described it precisely, as he always described his discoveries to her, fully, without inflation or deflation, the honest report of a person who has been examining something carefully and is ready to present their findings. Hathor listened to the full description, then she said, "Show me." He looked at her across the sanctuary. He reached not physically, not with any gesture, and he found her frequency, her specific emotional signature, the way a tuning fork finds its corresponding pitch in a room, and he felt it. The full, complex, ancient warmth of Hathor at rest, the specific quality of someone who has been holding the world's joy and grief in one body for 14,000 years, and has learned to carry both without being crushed by either. The quality of someone who is, in this moment, watching her son with a love so specific, and so complete that it was one of the most detailed things Harry had ever felt. He held it for a moment, then he let it go. Hathor sat across from him and said nothing for a time. "Well," she said, "it's very full," Harry said, meaning what it feels like to feel you. What it feels like to feel anyone who has been feeling things for 14,000 years. "Yes," she said. She was looking at him with an expression that was not quite smile and not quite not smile. The expression of a mother watching a child arrive somewhere she had been expecting them to arrive, and finding that arrival more specific and more moving than the anticipation of it had prepared her for. That is what the full range of this gift feels like. You are going to need to be careful with it. "Because I could use it wrong," he said. "Because it is intimate," she said. "More intimate than flight, more intimate than weather. When you reach into someone's frequency, you are receiving something they have not offered you with words. That requires more care, not less, than anything else you do." He sat with this. He sat with it for a long time, and outside the sanctuary the evening was coming in over the Nile in its usual bronze and gold, and the last of the day's petitioners were leaving the outer courtyard, and a priest was lighting the evening lamps. "What about what you just felt?" he said. "From you, did I take something?" Hathor looked at him steadily. "No," she said, "I let you have it. There is a difference and you will learn to feel the difference. Some people open toward you. Some people are simply open by nature, and what you receive from them is given." She paused. "What you felt from me was given." Harry looked at the lamp the priest was lighting in the outer courtyard, the flame caught and held in the glass, warm and specific in the evening. He looked at it for a moment and then looked back at his mother. "Thank you," he said, "for the feeling, for letting him have it, for what it had contained." Hathor inclined her head, a small, complete acknowledgement. "Always," she said. He was 15 when the calm scene came faster than his sense had given it. The metallic taste had been in the back of his throat for 3 days. He had told Horus and Hathor and the priests, and the preparations had been made, the shutters, the water storage, the animals brought inside, the rituals of protection over the temple's outer walls. He had given them 2 days arrival time based on the feeling's strength, and the storm's felt velocity. And this estimate had been consistent with his previous estimates, which had been accurate to within 6 hours in both directions for the past 4 years. Kamsin arrived 18 hours early. He felt it accelerate 12 hours before it changed, which was not enough. He went to the roof with the taste of copper sharp in his mouth, and the feeling in his sternum shifted from tightening to full pressure, the pressure of a system that had been gathering momentum in the empty western desert for longer than he had understood, longer than the sense had reached, which meant his range for this particular type of storm was shorter than he had believed. This was information. He filed it, and he went to deal with the storm. The wall to the west was the color of bronze going dark, the color of something large and solid that should not be moving but was, the color of the sky doing something that the sky did not technically have to explain to anyone. The wind hit the roof with a force that wanted him horizontal, and he stood into it, feet wide, and he reached. Not a polite reach, not the asking he had been warned against. The demand of someone who has a claim and is exercising it. The specific authority of a person who is not appealing to the sky, but addressing it as a king addresses the thing he rules. He had never done this fully before, had redirected storm edges, had smoothed thermal patterns, had adjusted wind direction in local systems. He had not confronted a calm scene at full force and told it no. He told it no. The word carried in it everything Horus had built into him over 6 years of training, everything the sky sense had built through 10 years of practice, the full weight of his actual nature, meeting the storm's actual nature without intermediary, and the storm received it the way everything received it when Harry was being fully what he was. As information from something that belonged to the same system, something that spoke the sky's own grammar with the authority of long residence. The calm scene slowed. The wall hesitated at its leading edge. The geometry of the storm's front disrupted, and Harry pushed north with his whole attention, and the leading edge deflected, moved north of the temple by a kilometer, and continued east through the gap he had created between the storm's trajectory and the village below. He stood on the roof in the residual wind, with the grit of the desert on his face and his hands and in his teeth, and the sky above the temple was clear, while the storm ran its course 1 kilometer north. And below the temple the village was loud with wind and dust, but its rooftops were intact, and its water storage was undisturbed. He came down from the roof with his hair full of desert. Horus was in the courtyard. He had been on the roof until the moment he wasn't necessary there, which was a specific form of trust that Harry was old enough to recognize and specific enough to feel. "You spoke to it," Horus said. "Yes." Harry ran a hand through his hair, displacing a quantity of sand that had opinions about staying. "It listened." "The sky listens to the sky," Horus said. And then, after a pause that had mass, "And you are the sky," Harry looked at his father. He looked at him across the courtyard in the aftermath of the storm, in the wind that was still running through the temple's outer walls with the residual energy of a system that had been redirected rather than stopped. And what he felt in the space between them was not pride exactly. Pride was too small a word and too singular, but something that included pride and included recognition, and included the specific feeling of having arrived at a place that had been waiting for you. The feeling of a thing becoming what it always was rather than becoming something new. "Yeah," he said, "I am." The owl arrived when Harry was 16, on a morning in late October when the light had the quality it had only in autumn, low and gold and deliberate, the light that the two lands produced when the year was beginning to consider what it had done. He felt it coming before he saw it. The sky sense tracked birds as a matter of course. Their flight paths were part of the sky's grammar, migrating formations in particular, and a lone owl flying south over the Mediterranean against its natural inclinations had the quality of scentness, of a creature executing someone else's agenda with the determined, slightly resentful efficiency of a professional. He was on the courtyard wall when it landed. It was a tawny owl, large and self-possessed, and it had the dust of a long journey on its wings and the expression of an animal that expected to be acknowledged for its service. Harry looked at the letter in its foot. The envelope was cream and heavy, sealed with red wax and a crest he did not recognize, though he recognized the family of magic it represented, the specific, institutional quality of a bureaucracy that has been in operation for long enough to develop its own aesthetic tradition, a tradition that believed in the solemnity of correspondence and the authority of official seals as a medium of conveying importance. The address, Horus Hathor, the Temple of Hathor, Dendera, Egypt. He took the letter. He gave the owl water from the courtyard bowl. He read the letter. He read it twice. The second reading was not because the first had been insufficient, but because the second was slower, giving each sentence its full weight, mapping the gap between what the letter said and what the letter meant. The gap was considerable. The letter said, in the careful, padded prose of someone who had spent a career communicating urgency through civility, "We are aware of your location. We would be grateful for the opportunity to discuss your return to the British magical community. Your country has not forgotten you. Britain requires the guidance and presence of its chosen one at this pivotal moment." What the letter meant was, "You are a resource we have been unable to locate, and we have located you, and we would like you to come back and be useful to us in the ways we have decided in your absence that you would be useful." Harry set the letter on his knee and looked at the river for a while. Then he took it to Horus. Horus read the letter with the expression he wore when reading things that required the full application of judgment without the interference of reaction. No crease between the eyes, no tightening of the jaw, the specific discipline of a king who has learned over millennia that his face is a document that the room reads simultaneously with whatever document he is reading. He set it on the table. He was quiet for a time that was neither short nor long, but was exactly the duration required. "Britain requires its chosen one," he said. The cadence was level in the specific way of a level that is maintaining itself through effort. "Yes," Harry said. "It's not Harry, it's..." Horus set two fingers on the letter, not picking it up, just marking it, as one would write of a missing object that had been found and needed returning to the shelf. "I noticed that too," Harry said. Horus stood. He moved to the doorway and stood with his back to the room, looking at the courtyard, and his shadow at this hour fell long and perpendicular across the stone and was very dark. "They have been searching," he said. 14 years is a long time to maintain a search for something you need." "Something," Harry said. "Yes." Horus turned back. His face was composed, the face of the king, and his golden eye was at full aperture, the eye that saw everything, and what it was seeing at this moment was his son. "What do you want to do?" Harry looked at the letter. He looked at it lying on the table in the October morning light, this piece of official cream-colored paper that had traveled from a country he had left as a wordless 3-year-old. He thought about what he knew. He knew about the prophecy. Horus had told him at 12, plainly and completely, because Horus was not a god who withheld information as a form of protection, and Harry was not a child who needed to be protected from information. He knew about Voldemort's death, which had preceded his own conscious life, which made the prophecy something that had been fulfilled by his mother before he was capable of participating in it. He knew about the Death Eater remnants, who had been operating in Britain for 3 years with increasing organization and decreasing constraint. He knew about the ward at St. Mungo's, the long-term ward, the ward where the Cruciatus victims had been kept for years, which Ra's archives had described in terms that were factual, and which were, factually, a specific form of sustained institutional failure, the failure of a bureaucracy to reckon honestly with the scale of what had been done to people under its watch. He thought about Amenhotep, who was 20 now and had 4 goats and a wife and a child of his own, and who had been sitting on a wall in grief for a lost goat on a bad week when a 6-year-old had sat beside him and hummed, and how that had been a small thing, a minor, domestic, human thing, and how the minor domestic human things were the only things that were ever actually fixed by effort rather than by waiting. "The prophecy is fulfilled," he said. "Voldemort is dead. My mother killed him with love when I was 14 months old, which means the British magical world's plan for their chosen one was completed by a woman named Lily Potter before I was old enough to walk." He looked at his father. "What they actually need is not a savior. They need the Death Eaters stopped, and they need the people who were hurt to be helped, and the ministry is too frightened to do either effectively." He paused. "I can do something about both," "You are not required to," Horus said. "I know," Harry said. "That's the point. I'm not going because they need their national asset returned. I'm going because I can do something useful and I've decided to." He looked at his father directly with his full green-eyed attention. "There's a difference." Horus looked at his son for a long, complete moment. He looked at him the way he looked at the sky from altitude, fully, without selective vision, receiving all of it. Then he said, "Come home when it's done." "Obviously," Harry said. He told Hathor in the sanctuary that afternoon, and she listened with the same quality of attention she brought to everything that mattered, completely without the performance of listening, the full presence of someone who had been receiving important information from important people for 14,000 years, and had not in all that time developed the habit of receiving it at partial capacity. When he finished, she said, "Dumbledore." "Yes," Harry said. "He is a genuinely intelligent and genuinely good man," she said, "who has made a practice of treating people as pieces in a strategy he believes in, and who believes in the strategy so completely that the belief has become invisible to him, the way the medium is invisible to the fish." She looked at Harry directly. "He will try to reconstruct you as a piece, not maliciously. He won't know he's doing it. That is what makes it worth knowing in advance." "Yes," Harry said, "and the ministry will want to manage you," she said. "Management is how bureaucracies relate to everything that frightens them, which is everything they cannot predict." She paused. "They will be very frightened of you. I know. Are you ready for that?" she said, not testing him. Asking because the question was real. Harry sat on the sanctuary floor, cross-legged, hands on his knees, in the posture he had been sitting in since he was 3 years old on a stone by the Nile on a dark morning that smelled of papyrus and the oldest river in the world. He sat in the posture and he thought about the question with the same full, unhurried attention he had given to everything he had ever been asked. "I know who I am," he said. "I know where I live. I know that you and Father are here, and the river, and the room with the door that opens from the inside and the roof at dawn." He met her eyes. "Knowing those things makes the other things manageable. Not easy, manageable." Hathor looked at him. The full devastating clarity of her regard was at its highest resolution, the look that saw everything, and what it saw was something she had been watching grow since the first morning by the river when he had said okay to Egypt with the whole of his 3-year-old self. Not confidence, which performs itself, but certainty, which simply is. The certainty of someone who knows they might lose and has decided it doesn't change the calculation. She put her palm against his face, warm, specific, complete. The touch of a mother who has been this specific mother for 16 years and is not finished yet and knows she is not finished, which is its own form of certainty. "Then go," she said, "and show them what the cupboard made." He put his hand over hers, briefly. Then he stood. He left at dawn 3 days later in dark traveling clothes rather than temple linen, with a pack in the kepesh and the sky sense running its constant, quiet inventory of the world above him. Horus was in the courtyard. He had been there since before the sun, which meant he had not slept or had not tried to, and he was standing in the way of someone who has made a deliberate decision to be exactly where he is and will not be moved from it. He looked at his son in the pre-dawn gray. He said, "Don't give them what they expect." "What do they expect?" Harry said. "A boy," Horus said, "grateful, manageable, marked by what was done to him rather than by what he did with it." Harry shouldered his pack. He looked at his father, the jaw and the golden eye and the hands and the full, unambiguous presence of someone who had been arriving every morning for 16 years and would keep arriving, and something in his chest, in the specific place where the sky sense lived, the space behind the sternum, did the thing it did when the thing that was happening was important and real and should be held rather than categorized. "I'll give them what they get," he said. He walked through the gate. The sun came over the eastern desert cliffs, and the courtyard flooded with gold, and Horus stood in it with his hands at his sides and watched his son's silhouette diminish above the desert horizon and become the sky, and stood a moment more in the gold silence before turning back inside to do the business of eternity, which continued, as it always had, regardless of what the heart was doing. The tawny owl was still on the courtyard wall. It watched all of this with the patient, incurious expression of a bird that has been in correspondence long enough to understand that it is always peripheral to the events its letters generate. Above, Harry was already over the desert, feeling the sky open around him in every direction, the full blue enormity of it, the air at altitude thin and cold and perfectly clear, and the Mediterranean ahead of him glittering in the new morning light like something that had been waiting to be seen. He flew north. Chapter 3. What the sun returns, he came to Britain from the east, at altitude, with the sun directly behind him. This was not accidental. The channel appeared below him as a gray-green seam between two versions of November, the French gray on the south side and the British gray on the north, two grays that were technically the same color and were, in practice, entirely different because the British gray had made its peace with itself in a way the French gray had not yet managed. He descended through cloud that was low and specific, cloud with opinions about precipitation, cloud that beaded cold on his face and hands, and turned the air to silver around him. And he emerged below the cloud line over Kent doing 160 miles per hour and decelerating, the fields below green and brown, and arranged in the orderly hedgerow geometry of a country that has strong convictions about boundaries. He slowed to walking pace over Westminster. He looked down at the city. London from above in November was the color of old pewter with fire in it, the Thames a dark band through the middle, the bridges crossing it at intervals with the regularity of syntax, the buildings on either bank a compressed, vertical argument about the relationship between history and the present tense. From this altitude, the city had the quality of something that had been accumulating itself for 2,000 years and was not finished and knew it. Harry looked at it for a long moment with the sky sense open and full, reading the city the way he read weather, not its surface but its system, the way it moved and what it was moving toward. Then he came down. He landed in a quiet street in Westminster in the gray morning, vertical descent, unhurried, his feet finding the wet pavement with the specific precision of someone who has been landing from altitude for 8 years. The sound was his feet on stone, and the cold of the British morning, and a pigeon somewhere nearby conducting its own business with the focused indifference of its kind. 3 people on the pavement had gone very still. He looked at them, a woman in a wool coat with a coffee, a man walking a terrier, a cyclist who had stopped pedaling and was coasting on momentum alone, staring. The terrier strained toward him on its lead, interested. Harry looked at the 3 people and they looked at him, and in their faces was the specific sequence of a human brain encountering something that exceeds its current categories. The moment of impact, the reflexive doubt, the decision, each person taking a slightly different path through that decision. The woman looked at her coffee. The man with the terrier said morning with the heroic normality of a Londoner determined to maintain his standards. The cyclist coasted around the corner and was gone. Harry looked at the red telephone box. He dialed the number. He waited for the ministry to take him down. The atrium of the Ministry of Magic received him the way a body of water receives a stone. The ripples went out before anyone consciously registered what had caused them. He walked through the golden space of it with his pack on his shoulder, and the kepesh on his hip and his face open to the room, no performance of arrival, no theater of entrance, just a person crossing a floor toward a lift. And the atrium slowed around him the way traffic slows when something on the road is not moving at the expected speed. The fountain at the center was large and gold, and celebrated a mythology about wizards and magical creatures that was doing its best with limited materials. Harry looked at it as he passed and noted, with the eye of someone who had been living among actual gods for 16 years, the specific distance between a culture's aspiration toward the divine and the divine's actual nature. The distance was not contemptible, it was human. Humans made things to hold what exceeded them, and the things were always smaller than what they reached for, and the reaching was still worth everything. He reached the lift. He pressed the button. The witch beside him was pretending to look at her paperwork and not succeeding. She was perhaps 40, sensibly dressed, with the organized manner of someone who had been a competent ministry employee for long enough to develop a general policy of not being surprised by anything the ministry produced in the way of unusual visitors. This policy was currently under strain. "Second floor," she said, making conversation, making an attempt at normalcy. "Yes," Harry said. "Visiting?" "Yes." She looked at his forehead. She looked away from his forehead with the speed of someone who has looked at something and would like to not have looked at it. "Right," she said. "Right." The lift arrived. They got in. They did not speak again. But when Harry got out on the second floor, she remained in the lift 2 seconds longer than necessary before pressing her own button. The 2 seconds of someone revising a model of the world and needing the time to do it adequately. The conference room had been prepared with the care of people who were afraid and were managing their fear through logistics, which is a very human response and one Harry recognized. There were 8 people around the table rather than the 7 the correspondence had implied, the extra person being a security measure disguised as a note-taker, which Harry clocked before he sat down and said nothing about because there was no reason to say anything about it. He recognized Fudge from the photographs in Ra's archive, round, lime green, sweating at a temperature that did not warrant it. He recognized Umbridge from the descriptions Hathor had sourced, which had been comprehensive, because Hathor's information network was ancient and extensive, and had strong opinions about people who use sweetness as a weapon while having no sweetness in them. He recognized Dumbledore, who sat at the far end of the table in the position of someone who has chosen not to occupy the head but who is, by the quality of his presence, effectively occupying the head regardless. Harry sat down. He did not sit at the table's end, which would have been obvious. He sat where the angle gave him unobstructed sight lines to everyone simultaneously, set his pack on the floor, set his hands on the table, and looked at the room with the full open quality of his attention, which was considerable. Fudge cleared his throat. It was an excellent throat clearing, practiced, sonorous, the throat clearing of a man who had been using it to purchase transition time in difficult meetings for 20 years. That is Harry. We are very glad. The correspondence said Britain requires its chosen one, Harry said. His voice was level and unhurried, the voice of someone who has not had occasion to develop anxiety around rooms full of important people, because the people he had grown up around made these people look like a child's sketch of authority. I'd like to understand what that means before we discuss anything else. Fudge looked at his papers. The papers had been shuffled extensively and contained, Harry observed, nothing that Fudge actually intended to consult. They were a prop, a way of giving his hand something official to do. Well, Fudge said, there is the matter of Britain's ongoing situation. The Death Eaters, Harry said. Among other concerns, yes, specifically Bellatrix Lestrange, Harry said, who has been operating in Scotland for 3 months with a group of 15, using a Muggle village as geographic cover, while planning something the Ministry has not been able to categorize because the Ministry's intelligence capacity has been significantly compromised by the same political pressures that prevented it from acting on what it already knew. He looked at Fudge. Is that the ongoing situation? The room was very quiet. The note-taker had stopped taking notes. Umbridge's smile was present and was, at this moment, doing considerable structural work. Harry, Dumbledore said from the far end of the table, and his voice had the quality of someone choosing to change the register of a conversation before it calcified into something unhelpful. Perhaps you and I might speak privately. In a moment, Harry said, without looking at Dumbledore. He was looking at the third Ministry official from the left, the young man with the exhausted eyes, the one who had been looking at Harry the previous day in the atrium with the quality of someone who was present at this table under duress and knew it. He was the only person in the room whose face was running the same information as his body. "What's your name?" Harry said to him. The young man looked surprised to be addressed. "Williamson," he said, "Auror Department." "You've been trying to locate Lestrange." Williamson looked at Fudge. Fudge was looking at the table. "Yes," Williamson said. "For how long?" 14 months. "What stopped you?" A pause that contained the full, complicated weight of an institution's failure to act described in one man's face. "Lack of authorization," Williamson said. "Insufficient certainty about her current threat level, competing departmental priorities." He paused again. "Paperwork." Harry looked at him for a long moment. "I'll have her location to you by tonight," he said. "I'll need you to have people in position for the aftermath. Containment, medical support, and someone authorized to modify the memories of approximately 30 Muggle villagers." He looked at Fudge. "That authorization will come from you." Fudge looked at Umbridge. Umbridge said, in the voice of layered sugar, "Harry, dear, there are protocols. There are people in a village in Scotland 40 miles from a group of Death Eaters who are planning something large," Harry said. "The protocols can be applied after." He looked at Umbridge without the quality of aggression, and without the quality of deference, with the quality, instead of someone who is waiting to see whether the person across from them is going to choose the useful thing or the habitual thing, which was a quality that Umbridge, in Harry's observation, found more destabilizing than either aggression or submission, because she had no existing response for it in her repertoire. "I'm not asking your permission," Harry said. "I'm telling you what's going to happen so you can be useful." Umbridge's smile held. Everything beneath it was working very hard. Fudge said, "I'll yes." Williamson, arrange the yes. Williamson was already writing. "Privately now," Dumbledore said. The room cleared with the speed of people who had been waiting for permission to leave and had received it. The note-taker gathered her parchment. Fudge gathered his shuffled papers. Umbridge gathered herself, which required a moment longer than the others, and left with the precise, deliberate tread of someone filing the meeting under ongoing assessment rather than concluded. Harry and Dumbledore were alone. Dumbledore rose from his chair at the table's end and walked to the window, and Harry watched him cross the room with the attention of someone reading a text he has been given preliminary notes about. The walk was the walk of a man whose body had been old for long enough that old had become its natural state, economical rather than labored. The walk of someone who had made a practical arrangement with their own mortality and was maintaining the arrangement without complaint. He stood at the window and looked at the Ministry's enchanted sky, perpetually pleasant, always the correct temperature of not quite sunny, the sky that the Ministry wished were true rather than the sky that was. "You are not what I expected," Dumbledore said. "I've been told," Harry said. The blue eyes turned from the window. They looked at Harry with the quality of looking that Harry had noted from across the table, the full intelligence, the genuine warmth, and underneath both the calculation, the constant algebraic processing of everything received in terms of what it meant for the plan. Not cynically. That was the thing. Not cynically, but as a habit so deep it had become invisible to the person running it, the way breathing is invisible. "I had constructed a picture of you," Dumbledore said. His voice was quieter than it had been at the table, the grandfatherly quality set slightly aside, showing the architecture beneath. "Over 14 years. The picture was built from what I needed, which is not the same as what was true. I am aware of this distinction in the present tense, which is," he paused, "an improvement on being aware of it only in retrospect. The picture was a boy," Harry said. "Marked and grieving and grateful for guidance, someone who needed the war explained to him and then needed to be pointed at it." "Yes," Dumbledore said, simply, "that is what the picture was." Harry looked at him. "You spent 14 years looking for me." "Yes. And in those 14 years the question of where I was and whether I was well," he said it without accusation, in the tone of a person examining a mechanism to understand its operation rather than to assign responsibility for its failures. "That wasn't the organizing question, was it? The organizing question was when I'd be available." Dumbledore came back to the table and sat, closer now, the gesture of someone choosing honesty as a posture rather than a stance. He set his hands on the table open and looked at them for a moment before looking up. "I want to tell you that you're wrong," he said. "I want to tell you there was genuine concern for you as a person throughout those years, and there was concern. But you are asking whether it was the organizing question." He looked at Harry directly. "It was not." The room received this. Harry sat with it and let it have its full weight, which was not as heavy as it might have been when he was younger, when the question of whether he had been worth finding for his own sake rather than for his utility was still an open wound rather than a scar. The scar had healed into something load-bearing. He knew the difference between Dumbledore's failure and the cupboard. Both were real. They were not the same size. "I'm not here to have that conversation with you," Harry said. "I'm here because there are people being hurt and I can stop it. What you did with the 14 years is your own reckoning." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "But going forward I'll decide what I do and when and how, and I'll tell you what I need from you, and you'll decide whether to provide it. That's the arrangement." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The blue eyes were doing their full work, and what they were processing was the distance between the picture they had built and what was actually sitting across the table. Not a boy, not a grieving orphan waiting for an explanation, but someone who had been built by 16 years of something Dumbledore had not participated in and could not retrofit himself into. Someone who was going to move through this situation with or without his cooperation, and who was, in offering him a role in it at all, being more generous than the 14 years warranted. Bellatrix Lestrange, Dumbledore said. Scotland, Harry said. I'll find her exactly tonight. I'll go in before dawn, have people in position by first light 3 miles out so they don't arrive before I'm done. He paused. Williamson, not the others. Williamson and myself, Dumbledore said. Harry looked at him. He considered the request, considered what it meant that Dumbledore was asking to be present, whether it was the plan reasserting itself or whether it was something more honest. The request of a man who has been directing a war from behind a desk for 20 years and is asking to see what it looks like when someone who is not afraid of it walks into it. Fine, Harry said. 3 miles out. You stay there. Dumbledore inclined his head. It was, Harry observed, a genuine inclination, no performance of humility, no strategic concession. The actual gesture of someone who has heard a term and accepted it. There's one more thing, Harry said. St. Mungo's, the long-term ward. I'm going there this afternoon. The Cruciatus patients, Dumbledore said, and in his voice was the weight of someone saying a thing they have said before without adequate result. I can do something for them, Harry said. Not cure, something else. I'll need access and I'll need the ministry to commit real resources to their ongoing care, not symbolic, not what's politically comfortable, but what's proportional to what was done to them. That commitment comes before anything else. I can arrange access, Dumbledore said. The resources are Fudge's decision. Then you'll help me make the case to Fudge, Harry said. Tonight, after Scotland, when he's in a more agreeable frame of mind. He stood and picked up his pack. He looked at Dumbledore across the table, and what he felt toward the old man was not warmth exactly, and not its opposite, but something more complicated than either. The specific feeling of someone looking at a person who has done real harm through genuine goodness, which is among the most difficult moral textures to navigate because it refuses the clean categories. I think you're trying, Harry said. I think it's late to be starting, but that's not a reason not to start. Dumbledore looked at him. Something moved in the blue eyes that was not one thing but several, passing through in quick succession. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, Harry said. Go to Scotland. St. Mungo's hospital for magical maladies and injuries smelled of potions and clean linen, and the specific institutional quality of a building that has been dealing with the human body's capacity for catastrophe for a long time, and has organized itself around that fact without entirely ceasing to be hopeful about it. The long-term ward was on the 4th floor. The healer who met him at the ward's entrance was Margaret Bell, 45, dark-haired, with the face of someone who had been spending significant portions of their professional life being told that the resources required for what she was trying to do were unavailable, and who had continued trying anyway with the stubborn, exhausted grace of the truly committed. She looked at Harry with the specific attention of someone who has been told a thing is coming and is assessing whether the thing matches its description. The letter said you could help, she said, not hoping, not demanding. Presenting the claim for verification. I can do something, Harry said. I want to be specific about what it is and what it isn't. It isn't healing. I'm not a healer and this isn't medicine. Then what is it, she said. Presence, he said. A specific kind. Floor level underneath what they're feeling, something that tells the nervous system it's not alone, that there's a weight-bearing structure under the floor. He paused. Some of them will feel it consciously. Some won't. The effect is the same. She looked at him for a long moment. She was, he observed, the kind of person who processed through her face honestly. He could read exactly what she was doing, running the claim through her clinical knowledge, finding it outside her existing categories, deciding whether outside her existing categories meant impossible or simply new. How do you know it will work, she said. I've been doing it since I was 6, Harry said. In a different context, the mechanism is the same. He met her eyes. I'm not asking you to believe it before you see it. I'm asking you to let me try. She looked at him for another moment. Then she opened the ward door. The ward had 12 beds, 12 people in various configurations of presence and absence. The specific tragedy of people who were physically intact and experientially fragmented. The Cruciatus curse having done to their minds what a long winter does to a building, not destroying the structure, but getting into every crack and compromising the integrity of the thing from the inside. The slow, catastrophic work of something that should not have been let in. Harry walked to the center of the ward. He stood still. He did not close his eyes. He did not adopt a posture of performance or concentration. He simply stood in the center of the room and opened the thing in his chest, not Hathor's gift in its full capacity, not the direction-seeking frequency reading that he had used at the feasts, but its most fundamental form, the floor, the ground note. The presence that said, beneath every other message the room was running, beneath the medications and the clinical sounds and the quality of institutional waiting that had accumulated in the ward's walls over years of unchanged occupation. Something is here. Something is holding. You are not falling through the world. He felt the 12 people in the room. He felt them as frequencies, not their words, not their thoughts, but their presence in the world, the specific signature of 12 individuals who were still, despite everything that had been done to them, present, still here. Still in the most fundamental sense themselves. The Cruciatus had broken things, but it had not broken the Cothred, the tether to the living world, and the tether was what he was speaking to. Below the damage, below the fragmentation, to the irreducible fact of their continued existence. He felt the room shift, not dramatically, not in the way of revelation or event. The way barometric pressure shifts, the quality of the air changing incrementally, the room's atmosphere altering at a level below conscious perception, something that the body received before the mind had an instrument to measure it. Some of the 12 moved small adjustments, the unconscious repositioning of people whose bodies were receiving information that the brain had not yet categorized, but was beginning to respond to. The way a plant adjusts toward light it cannot see directly. A man in the third bed on the left opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling with an expression that was not his previous expression, which had been the expression of someone who was not, exactly, looking at anything. He looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone who was looking at the ceiling. Present tense, active verb. Bell made a sound beside Harry that was not a word. Harry held the floor for an hour without effort, without performance, the ground note running steady and constant through the ward the way the Nile ran steady through the desert, without agenda and without limit, simply giving what it gave because that was what it did. He talked to Bell while he held it, not about what he was doing, but about her work, about the patients, about the specific challenges of treating damage that had no clear organic etiology. And she talked back. The conversation of two people who were each doing something serious and had agreed to do it simultaneously, the talk being part of the holding rather than separate from it. When he stopped, she felt it, not as a loss but as a completion, the way you feel the end of a piece of music that ended correctly. How? She said. I'll write it down, he said. Everything I know about how it works. It's not a technique exactly, it's more like a quality of attention, and qualities of attention can be learned. He paused. There's someone who knows this better than I do. I'm going to ask her to correspond with you if you're willing. Who? Bell said. Her name is Hathor, Harry said. She'll respond to letters addressed to Dendera. Don't make the first letter a request for resources. Make it an introduction. She responds to people who lead with who they are rather than what they want. Bell was writing. She wrote quickly, with the handwriting of someone who took notes for practical use rather than record, the handwriting of someone who intended to act on what they were capturing. And the ministry resources, she said, for ongoing care. Tonight, Harry said. I'll have an answer for you tomorrow morning. She looked up from the notes. You're confident about that? Harry looked at the ward, the 12 beds, the 12 people, the third bed on the left where the man was still looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone who was looking at it. Fudge is going to be in a very cooperative frame of mind tomorrow, he said. Yes. He found Lestrange from 3,000 feet. The fire disturbance was as he had felt it from Egypt, but closer now it had more detail. The specific signature of dark magic operating at scale. The quality of a will choosing destruction with the repeated, practiced ease of someone for whom destruction had long since become automatic rather than chosen. The way a craftsman's hands find the motion of their craft without the need for conscious direction. Dark magic at that level of automaticity had a particular flavor in the Sky sense. Not dramatic, not the storm quality of something large and violent, but chronic, the signature of something that had been running for a long time in a relatively small space, the way contamination runs in water. He found the farmhouse at 10 in the evening. He came over the ridge at tree level, moving quietly through the cold Scottish dark, and saw it below, stone-built, isolated, the wards visible to his sense as a local pressure in the air around the building, a volume of intentional resistance to outside perception. Competent work. Designed by someone who understood the principles and had applied them with care. He took them apart in 40 seconds, not by force, by finding the logic of the ward structure, the grammar of how it was built, and addressing it in its own language, the way you unlock a door by understanding the mechanism rather than breaking the door. The wards fell with a sound that was felt rather than heard, a subsonic release of tension, and below in the farmhouse, he felt the collective awareness of 15 people register the loss simultaneously. He went through the roof, not metaphorically. The farmhouse roof was old slate, and the gaps between the slates were wide enough, with the sky cooperating, to pass through without structural damage, and he descended through the cold, dark interior of the building, and emerged in the main room standing on the stone floor with the sudden, specific presence of someone who has just changed all the parameters of the conversation. The fire in the grate was large and gave good light. 15 people were on their feet, wands out, before he landed, reflexes then, which indicated a group that had been keeping itself prepared. The formation was competent. 3 covered the door, 4 covered the windows, 2 were positioned at the room's center to respond directionally, and the remaining 6 had arrayed themselves with the practiced ease of people who had done this kind of defensive arrangement many times and had survived by being good at it. Bellatrix Lestrange stood in the center of the room. She was smaller than the archive descriptions had suggested, not physically diminished, but carrying herself with the compressed quality of someone whose sense of their own size was not dependent on their actual dimensions. She had the eyes of someone who found the intensity of their own perception painful enough to direct outward whenever possible. The eyes of someone for whom other people were primarily surfaces on which to project the contents of their own inner weather. She looked at Harry with those eyes and did something he had not fully anticipated, which was to laugh, not derisively, not theatrically, but with the genuine surprise of someone encountering something they had not predicted and finding the novelty interesting. "Harry Potter," she said, "you came through the roof." "Yes," Harry said. "Theatrical," she said, "but then you're not quite what I expected." Her head tilted, the angle of a bird examining something unfamiliar. "You're not afraid." "No," Harry said. "Everyone is afraid of me," she said. And there was in this statement not pride exactly, but something closer to habit, the report of someone who has been running the same test for long enough that the result has become infrastructure, the foundation on which everything else is built. She was conducting the test now, Harry understood, looking for the quality of fear in him the way a craftsman looks for a specific material, searching for its texture in his face and posture, and the quality of his presence in the room, not finding it. Adjusting to its absence with the focused, slightly irritable attention of someone whose instrument is returning unexpected results. "What are you?" she said. "They made you into something." "Someone," Harry said. Her wand came up. The spell was well-made, old dark magic, built from a school of practice that predated Hogwarts, that had its roots in something considerably older and more specific than the curricula of any wizarding institution. It came across the room with the purposeful speed of something that had been used many times before on many different targets, and was therefore entirely confident in its own effectiveness. Harry let it arrive. He did not move, did not raise a hand, did not cast a counterspell. He received the spell the way he had received the calm scene, not by being invulnerable but by being incompatible, by being built of a material that the spell's logic could not categorize. The way a wind cannot move a river because their systems are not in competition, but in conversation. The spell hit the quality of what Harry was and found nothing in him that it was designed to address. No fear, no isolation, no wound deep enough to lever open, no tether to self that could be severed, and it broke against him and dissipated the way sound dissipates in an open space, spending itself on the vast, indifferent air. Bellatrix stared. 3 Death Eaters cast simultaneously from his left. Harry turned to them with one motion, and the sky moved with him. the wind off the Scottish moors finding the farmhouse's gaps and entering with the directed intentionality of something that had been asked. Not the random movement of air through an old building, but air that was going somewhere specific, that was answering a direction, that hit the 3 open flames of the wall sconces on the east wall and took them down, plunging the room's left side into dark. The room's quality changed. Not the panicked chaos of people who have lost their light, but the specific, recalibrated tension of people who are good at what they do and are revising their approach in real time. 2 of the 15 were already moving toward the door in the dark. Harry felt them, their positions precise in the sky sense, the room an open space to his perception in a way it was not to theirs, and he spoke to the air at the door, and the door held, not with a spell but with the weight of the atmosphere behind it, the pressure differential of the full Scottish night pushing against a surface that had been quietly reinforced. The 2 stopped at the door. They pushed. The door did not move. In the dark, Bellatrix cast again. This spell was different from the first. It was targeted not at his body but at the specific quality his body carried, the sky sense, the thing that made the air answer him, aimed with the precision of someone who had spent the intervening seconds identifying the nature of what she was dealing with and selecting a tool appropriate to it. It hit him in the space behind his sternum where the sky sense lived, and it was, he registered, a genuinely sophisticated piece of magic. The severing intention was precise and well calibrated, designed to cut a person from their own gift the way you cut a rope. He felt it land. He felt it find the space, and he felt what it was trying to do, the severing motion, the cutting intention, and he felt it fail. Because the sky sense was not a rope. It had never been a rope, not an attachment between himself and some external power he had been granted, not a gift in the sense of something given from outside and therefore separable. It was him. It was as continuous with him as his own breath, as his ability to feel the temperature of his own hands, as the part of him that had been 3 years old in the dark, and had looked at the door when it opened with those green eyes that had already, in 3 years, developed the quality of someone who is measuring the world rather than merely receiving it. You cannot sever a thread by cutting the middle if the thread is made of the person holding it. The spell dissipated. The room was very dark and very cold, and had the quality of a space in which several calculations were happening simultaneously and reaching their conclusions at different speeds. Harry let the silence be the silence it was, the kind of silence that is not empty but full of the specific weight of people at the end of their methods. He lit the room, not with magic, with the sky, with the quality of presence that the sky carried at dawn, the moment when the night's full dark begins to admit light from below the horizon, the moment before sunrise that is not sunrise but its announcement, a light without source that seems to come from the air itself. It was a gentle light, impractical for combat, entirely unsuitable as a show of force. It simply made everything visible. In that light he looked at the room. 11 Death Eaters still standing, wands up, the specific posture of people who are running on training and discipline rather than confidence, the posture of soldiers whose command structure has encountered something outside its operational parameters and who are waiting for updated orders. 4 on the floor, not dead, not badly injured, the efficient result of the flat of the Kepesh in the dark, the specific choice of a fighter trained by a god of war who measured force with the same precision he measured everything. Bellatrix Lestrange stood in the center of the room and looked at Harry in the soft light with the expression she had been building toward since he came through the roof. The expression of someone at the end of their methods who is discovering, in real time, that the end of their methods is not where they expected to find themselves and is not a comfortable place to be. "It won't work," she said, meaning the magic, meaning everything she had tried. "No," he said. "Why?" Genuine question. Under the bravado, the operational mask, the performance of a woman who had built an identity from her own dangerousness, genuine. She wanted to know why. The specific, terrible need of someone who has built a life on a capacity and is watching the capacity fail. Harry crossed the room to stand in front of her. He walked through the standing Death Eaters, not past them but through the space between them, and they stepped back as he passed, not because he threatened them, but because the quality of his movement through the room had the quality of the sun moving through a space, not demanding passage, simply receiving it. He stood in front of Bellatrix. He looked at her. He looked at her the way Hathor had looked at the woman on the sanctuary floor, fully, without flinching from what was there, without the need to manage the quality of what he saw before he was willing to look at it. He looked at the eyes that were bright with the specific brightness of someone who had made a friend of their own damage. And he looked at the hands that had held the wand for 30 years of deliberate harm. And he looked at the face of a woman who had been, at some point, before all of the choices and the years and the accumulation of practiced cruelty, a person whose Kothred was new and whole and attached to the living world with the same basic dignity that everyone's was at the beginning. What he felt for her was not love in the warm sense. It was love in the Hathor sense, the force, not the feeling, the quality that does not flinch from what a person has become while not losing sight of what they were. The quality that is more demanding, not less, than pity or contempt, because it refuses to reduce the person to either their worst actions or their earliest self, but insists on the full complexity of the thing, which is the heaviest thing to hold and the only honest one. Because what you do, he said, doesn't work on someone who knows what love actually is. She looked at him. The bright eyes did something complicated. Sentiment, she said. The word was reflexive, the trained dismissal, the word she had been using for decades to close the door on the register of experience she had decided was weakness. No, he said. Physics. He held out his hand, not as a threat, not as an offer of clemency or comfort. The hand extended with the quality of someone presenting an honest option. You can stop now, or you can continue, and both of these will resolve in the same place, but one of them costs more getting there. Bellatrix looked at the hand. She looked at it for a long time in the soft, impossible light that had no source, the light that had come with him from the Egyptian morning somewhere in his chest, and was now filling a stone farmhouse in Scotland with the quality of a sunrise that was not occurring. She let her wand drop. It hit the stone floor. The sound it made was small and total, the sound of something that had been held for a very long time put down. Harry said to the room, without raising his voice, "Everyone moved to the east wall." They moved to the east wall, all of them. He bound their wands with a gesture to the air, and the air obliged. The draft threw the old farmhouse, carrying each wand to a corner of the room, and depositing them there with the unhurried efficiency of something that had been asked a simple task and saw no reason to complicate it. Then he went outside and sat on the stone wall in the cold Scottish dark and took an apple from his pack and ate it, and waited for the dawn. Dumbledore arrived with his people at first light, Williamson and 4 Aurors and Dumbledore himself, who had, Harry noted, honored the 3-mile limit exactly. He came to stand beside Harry on the stone wall, and looked at the farmhouse with the quality of someone reading a scene the way they would read a document, thoroughly, and with full attention to what was not stated as much as what was. "Everyone alive," he said. "Everyone alive," Harry confirmed. He had finished the apple and was looking at the moorland, which was extraordinary in its honest bleakness, flat and wind-scoured and brown, the heather past its season, stretching in every direction with the absolute conviction of a landscape that has never required approval. Dumbledore looked at the window of the farmhouse where, through the glass, 15 Death Eaters were sitting against the east wall in the order in which they had been placed. He looked at Bellatrix, who was visible among them, sitting with her head forward and her hands in her lap in the posture of someone in the process of a very long reckoning. "You could have," Dumbledore began and stopped. "Yes," Harry said. "Why didn't you?" Harry looked at the moorland for a moment. He thought about Hathor sitting on the floor of the sanctuary receiving a woman's grief with her full body. He thought about the rope, not the surrender but the maintained connection, the thread back to yourself that lets you go in without dissolving. He thought about what Hathor had said about mercy, not the softness of it but the demand, the fact that mercy at scale required more strength than its alternative. The specific difficulty of looking at what a person had done and choosing to leave the question of their existence to something larger than your own judgment. "Because destroying her would have been clean," he said, "and clean is not always right." He looked at Dumbledore. "And because my mother is in the mercy business and I have been learning from her for 16 years. Dumbledore looked at him. The blue eyes were doing something that was not calculation, or it was calculation running in a register that had admitted something it had not previously admitted, which changed the quality of what the calculation could produce. He was quiet for a long time. "I owe you an apology," he said, Harry waited. "Not for anything I did to you directly," Dumbledore said. "You were not accessible to be wronged directly. But for what I intended. The 14 years of searching were not 14 years of concern for a child. They were 14 years of concern for a function. And when you arrived and were not the function," he paused. "I felt my mind attempt to construct a new version of you that could serve the function anyway. I want you to know that I saw it doing this. I want you to know that I told it to stop." He looked at Harry with the directness of someone who has decided that indirectness is a luxury he can no longer justify. "I am telling you because you already knew, and the acknowledgement is better than the management of it." Harry looked at the old man beside him on the wall. He looked at the full complexity of what was there, the genuine goodness, the genuine harm, the genuine effort currently being made, the genuine lateness of the effort. He held all of it without resolving it. "You were trying to protect people," he said. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "That's true," Harry said. "And it isn't sufficient, but it's a real thing." He stood from the wall. "Be useful from here on. That's the only apology I need." Dumbledore rose beside him. There was, in the quality of the old man straightening, something that had not been there the previous day in the conference room, not quite lightness, but the quality of a weight that has been named and is therefore carryable in a way that unnamed weight is not. "The ministry resources," Dumbledore said, "sent Mungos. I'll speak with Cornelius this morning." "I'll be there," Harry said. "Fudge will find me more persuasive in person." The ghost of something crossed Dumbledore's face that was nearly amusement and was also the very specific expression of a man thinking, "Yes, I imagine he will." The Wizengamot sat on the 17th day. Harry went to it as he went to everything in these 3 weeks, directly, on his own terms, with the quality of someone who had decided the nature of their participation in an event and was not seeking the event's validation of the decision. He took the chair with the chains that did not attach themselves, and he sat in the courtroom that had seen 100 years of wizarding justice, administered with the mixture of genuine principle and institutional self-interest that characterized most human justice-making. And he looked at the assembled Wizengamot with the open attention of someone who was willing to find useful people in the room, and had learned, by this point, approximately where they were. Umbridge opened with the statute of secrecy question regarding the Westminster landing. Harry addressed it in 1 minute and 30 seconds and moved on before she could respond, because her question was not actually about the statute of secrecy, and they both knew it, and prolonging the exchange would be a kindness to neither of them. The third charge from the left, the older member with the tired fair face, Griselda Marchbanks, 87 years old, had examined Dumbledore's owls and had never forgotten it and had been in rooms like this since before most of the current membership had been born, raised her hand. "What," she said, "do you want from us?" Harry looked at her. He had been waiting for this question from this person since he sat down. "Compensation for the families who lost members to the war," he said, "not symbolic. Specific, proportional, indexed to actual loss. The calculation should be made by people who lost people, not by people who administrated the war." He paused. "Full resources for the St. Mungo's long-term ward on a timeline that reflects the duration of the neglect, which is 3 years minimum." He paused again. "And the prosecution of the 15 people in Auror custody, conducted by people with no previous relationship to the Death Eater network, including no family relationships, professional relationships, or institutional dependencies." The courtroom absorbed this. It was not a short silence. "And in return," Marchbanks said, "testimony," Harry said, "full testimony regarding the events in Scotland and the intelligence that led to them. The complete record of what the Sky observed, which is admissible under Section 12 of Wizarding Evidentiary Law as non-wand observed evidence." He met her eyes. "And the removal from British magical records of any language classifying me as a resource, an asset, a ward of the ministry, or a subject of any prophecy requiring institutional management. I am a person, the records should reflect that." The courtroom's silence was of a different quality than the first. Fudge said, "If we decline, I've told you what I'm offering," Harry said. "What you do with it is your decision. I'm going home to Egypt at the end of the month regardless." He looked at Fudge without urgency, without threat, with the patient openness of someone who genuinely does not need the outcome to go a particular way in order to be all right. The question is whether Britain gets to say it made the right choices when it had the chance. Marchbanks made the sound of someone who had heard argument in this chamber for 60 years and had just heard one she would remember. She picked up her quill. "The Wisengama," she said, "will vote." They voted. Harry sat in the chair with the chains that would not attach and watched, and the vote was not unanimous and was not immediate and was not without the specific, grinding friction of institutional self-interest having to be overcome by institutional conscience, which was how genuine votes worked. Umbridge voted against. 6 others voted against. The rest voted in favor, and Marchbanks recorded the result with the handwriting of someone for whom the record was the point rather than its own reward. The handwriting of 87 years of believing that what was written mattered. Harry signed the agreement they produced. He handed Williamson the full Sky Sense record of Scotland, which he rendered into written testimony in a side room with the unhurried precision of someone describing what they directly observed, which was what the sky had directly observed, which was everything. He left the ministry at 6 in the evening and walked back to the unremarkable building in Edinburgh through streets that smelled of cold in November and the particular quality of a city going home for the evening, the ambient warmth of millions of people moving toward their own domestic spaces, toward the rooms that contained their specific and irreplaceable evidence of belonging. On the last day he went back to Surrey, not by air, by train in a carriage that smelled of old upholstery and coffee, watching Britain go past the window, the fields and hedgerows and villages with their church spires, the country going about its long argument with the landscape over the correct relationship between human habitation and the natural world. He sat with his pack and let the country be what it was, complicated, ordinary, full of people doing the work of being alive in it. He walked from the station. The street was quiet. The December cold had settled into it with the deliberate patience of British winters, the cold that did not dramatize itself but was simply always there, the cold of a country that had learned to live with its own weather rather than fight it. He stood outside number 4, Privet Drive, and looked at it. The brass number. A new wreath, identical to every previous wreath, the Dursley aesthetic consistent across the years. The lawn edged with the precision of people who understood their social contract with the street to be a horticultural one. The windows dark at this hour in the mid-afternoon, Vernon presumably at the office, Petunia presumably inside doing whatever Petunia did in the mid-afternoon, in a house that contained, now, only herself and her husband and the specific quality of a life arranged very carefully so as not to exceed the boundaries of the arrangement. He did not go in. He was not here for them. What he had to settle with the house, with what the house had been, with what it had contained, with what the cupboard under the stairs had produced in him, had been settled over 16 years of Egyptian mornings, one dawn at a time, by a goddess who hummed in the dark and a god who extended an open hand and a river that asked nothing of the people who swam in it except that they enter. He stood on the pavement and looked at the house, and he felt, in the space behind his sternum where the Sky Sense lived, the full architecture of what he was standing in front of. Not the building, but the history, the cold and the latch and the spider plant, and the mat with its worn letters, and the 3-year-old who had counted sounds in the dark, and waited with the ancient patience of a child who had no alternative to waiting. He felt all of that, and he let it be exactly what it was, not small, not overcome, not the foundation of a narrative of triumph, just true. Just part of the full structure of himself, carrying its own weight, neither more nor less than any other part. A fox appeared on the pavement 2 houses down. It sat with the specific self-possessed quality of urban foxes, which have learned to be present in human spaces without apologizing for the fact of their presence, which was a quality Harry found instructive and congenial. The fox looked at him with amber eyes, direct and uncurated. He looked back at the fox. The fox looked at him. Then Harry lifted into the air, unhurried, vertical, from the pavement of Privet Drive in the gray December afternoon, straight up through the cold British air, past the roofline and the chimney and the aerials and the cloud that was low and specific and had opinions about precipitation. He went up through the cloud into the clear air above it, and the cloud layer fell away below him, and above the cloud the sky was blue and clean and cold. the blue of the northern sky that was not the Egyptian blue and was not less blue for the difference, just honest about its own latitude and season and quality of light. He turned south and east. He opened the sky sense to its full range and felt the full system of it. The weather across Europe, the Mediterranean warm and present below the Italian peninsula, the thermals over North Africa rising in the afternoon heat, and further, the familiar signature of the Nile Delta, and then the full length of the river running south through the land that was the oldest land in the world, the land that had been dreaming since before the word dream. The land where the sun arrived every morning with the certainty of something that has been doing this since the first morning and does not intend to stop. He felt the temple at Dendera, felt it as a specific warm point in the sky sense, a location that carried a quality different from the surrounding landscape, the way a hearth carries a quality different from the surrounding room, not because it was divine, though it was, but because it had been home for 16 years, and 16 years of arriving back at the same place from every direction builds a signature in the place that is the accumulated record of the arriving. He felt Hathor in the inner courtyard. He felt Horus on the north roof. He flew toward them. He came over the Mediterranean at altitude and then down through the warm air of North Africa, descending with the afternoon, and the smell of Egypt reached him before the sight of it, papyrus and warm stone, and the wet green smell of the river's edge, the smell of a place that has been generating life along its banks since before the word life existed. He came over the temple wall and dropped into the courtyard, and his feet found the warm, familiar stone, and the sound of his landing was the sound it had always been, the ordinary, specific, irreplaceable sound of a person arriving where they live. Hathor was in the courtyard. She was standing with the sistrum in her hand, not playing it, just holding it, the posture of someone who had been doing something else and had stopped and had decided to wait here instead. She looked up when he came over the wall. She looked at him with her full attention, the full devastating clarity of Hathor regarding the thing she was regarding, and what she saw in him she received the way she received everything, completely, without flinching from any part of it, without needing to manage it into something smaller than it was before she could hold it. He crossed the courtyard to her. She set the sistrum against the wall and put both arms around him, and he stood in his mother's arms in the warm December afternoon beside the Nile, and the warmth of her was specific and total, not the warmth of an abstraction, but the warmth of this person, this mother, these arms that had carried him out of England 16 years ago and across the sea and down to a river that smelled of something ancient and alive. These arms that had held him on the roof during storms and set bread and figs in front of him in the mornings for 16 years, with the matter-of-fact generosity of someone for whom feeding the people she loved was not a gesture but a grammar. He held on. The courtyard was warm and the river was moving south below the wall, and a hoopoe was walking along the opposite wall in its usual self-important fashion, and the evening was coming in from the east in the slow bronze way of Egyptian evenings. And he held on and she held on. And neither of them said anything for a long time, because there was nothing yet that language could add to what was already fully expressed by two people, standing in a warm courtyard, holding each other with the specific weight of 16 years of accumulated arrivals. After a while, Hathor said against the top of his head, "The healer wrote." "Bell," Harry said. "She writes well," Hathor said. "Direct, honest about her gaps. Good instincts, and she leads with who she is rather than what she wants, which you apparently advised." A pause. "I have agreed to correspond. I told her there are things that cannot come through letters, and she should plan to visit in the spring." Harry stepped back from the embrace and looked at his mother. The clarity of her regard was warm now, fully warm, the specific warmth of someone who has already processed everything and is now in the after moment of it, the moment of having received a person back intact. "You're going to teach her," he said. "I'm going to teach everyone who can learn," Hathor said. "That has always been my policy." She paused. "Your father is on the north roof, waiting, conducting administrative work," she said, with the quality she always brought to that specific sentence about Horus, the quality of someone describing a very old truth with very precise language, which is waiting. Harry looked at the temple's north stairwell. He looked at it and felt, in the sky sense, the specific quality of the north roof and its occupant, the weight of a god of sky who has been the lord of the sky since before the concept of waiting existed, and who was on the north roof of a temple in Egypt in December, waiting for his son to come home. He went up. The north roof faced the river, and the light coming off the water in the late afternoon was the light of this season and this hour. Not the blazing declaration of summer, but the lower, angled gold of December. The gold that came in sideways and made long shadows of everything it touched. The gold that was not less gold for being quieter about it. Horus was standing at the roof's edge with his back to the stairwell. He stood the way he always stood, the full physical statement of a presence that had decided to occupy a space and had no ambivalence about the decision. And he was looking at the river with the same total attention he brought to everything in the world that mattered to him, which was the quality that had always, since Harry was old enough to understand it, told him more about what Horus valued than anything his father had ever said explicitly. He turned when he heard the footsteps, fully as he always turned. He looked at his son in the north roof's December light, and Harry looked back at him, and between them passed the kind of silence that is not empty but load-bearing, the silence of two people who know each other well enough that language is not the primary medium of exchange but a supplement to something that runs beneath it. "Well," Horus said. "Well," Harry said. "Bellatrix Lestrange." "Alive," Harry said. "In custody. Being prosecuted by people with no institutional conflicts. Williamson is overseeing it. The ministry, moving in the right direction, slowly. Marchbanks will keep them honest. She's been doing it for 60 years and hasn't stopped." He paused. "The ward at St. Mungo's has funding. Bell is corresponding with Mother." Another pause. "The records have been amended." Horus took this in with the quality of attention he gave to all complete reports, fully, without interrupting, receiving the whole before processing any part. Then, "And you?" Harry looked at the river. He looked at it moving south in the December gold with its enormous, indifferent, intimately familiar intention, and he felt it through the sky sense, felt the river's conversation with the sky, the water cycle that ran from here to the Mediterranean and back, the full closed system of it. The system he was inside, the system that recognized him the way the sky recognized him, the way the desert recognized him, the way the warm stone of this roof recognized the specific weight of his footsteps. "Good," he said. "Better than." "Better than good," Horus said, not a question. "Yeah," Harry said, "better than good." He went to stand beside his father at the roof's edge. Side by side, the god and his son, looking at the river in the late afternoon gold. And the river did not change because they were looking at it and did not need to. Because the river was the river and had been the river since before the word river. And the sky was the sky above it as it had always been. And the sun was going toward the western cliffs in the way it went every day since the first day. Slow and inevitable, and not in need of anyone's permission or gratitude to continue. Below them in the inner courtyard, the sistrum began to play. It was a single note first, long and warm, the ground note, the floor under everything. Then the melody began to find its way around that ground, building on it. The music that Hathor had been playing since before music had a name. The music of joy that had survived its own capacity for destruction and come back to itself through the red of the beer and the smell of the field. The music of love that was not a feeling but a force. The music of everything that had been broken and had become, through the deliberate application of time and warmth and insistence, load-bearing. Harry stood on the north roof of the Temple of Hathor at Dendera in the December afternoon and listened to his mother play. And the sky held itself above him in its full and enormous patience, and the river ran below in its full and indifferent grace, and the sun completed its daily business with the western cliffs and was gone, and the afterglow came, that brief particular gold that is not quite day and not quite dark, but the world's honest acknowledgement of the transition. Horus set a hand on top of his son's head. The same hand, the same weight, the weight of someone who had been arriving at this specific gesture for 16 years and would keep arriving at it, not because it was ritual but because it was true, because it was the gesture of a god who had been a king since the beginning of time and had learned, through this specific ordinary practice of fatherhood, that the most sovereign act available to anyone was to put your hand on someone's head in the evening and mean it. Harry stood still. The way he had stood still the first morning in the courtyard with bread and dates and a new name in his mouth, held, not braced, in the way of someone receiving something they do not want to end. The sistrum played on below them. The stars came up over the eastern desert, one by one, in the methodical way of stars that have been doing this every night since before anyone was watching and will continue doing it long after watching is no longer available. The stars of the two lands, the oldest stars in the world's longest memory, arriving as they always arrived, faithful and indifferent, and exactly where they had always been.